Have you ever wondered why some nights feel heavier than others? Why the silence after midnight sounds less like absence and more like memory? Tonight, you are not alone. You've traveled far, not across distance, but across years, across heartbeats, across the quiet ache of things left unsaid. These stories come from long ago, from moss-covered temples, from tea shared beneath moonlight, from paths walked by those who sought not answers, but deeper questions. They speak of a world before noise, before time ticked in straight lines, when truth was whispered through bamboo groves and compassion weighed more than gold. So let go now. Loosen your breath, your grip, your need to understand. You do not have to be strong here. You do not have to carry anything. Just listen. To the sound of a bell that was never rung. To the footsteps of a monk who never arrived. To the hush between raindrops on an old wooden roof. Let these ancient voices carry you, not away from your life, but deeper into it, into the part that still remembers how to be still. Are you ready? Then close your eyes and let us begin. Story 1. The Bell That Was Never Rung. Long ago, in a mountain kingdom where clouds slept low and winds spoke in ancient tones, there stood a temple so old that even the oldest monks had forgotten its beginnings. The stone paths were worn smooth by generations of bare feet. The cedar doors creaked not with age, but with the weight of memory. At the center of this temple stood a great bronze bell, tall as a man, wide as an ox, cast with sacred inscriptions no one could read anymore. It had been there for centuries, but it had never rung, not once. The villagers below called it the Silent Bell. Some said it was cursed. Others believed it waited for a perfect soul, someone whose heart was so empty of ego, so full of stillness, that the bell would recognize them and sing. But monks came and went. Novices swept its base with reverence. Abbots meditated beside it for hours, days, years. No sound, not even a murmur of vibration. Over time, the bell became less of a mystery and more of a monument, a relic, a question left unanswered, and then, quietly, unasked. Until the girl arrived. She was perhaps 12, thin as mist, eyes like ink dropped in water. She arrived barefoot, clothed in threadbare linen. No one knew where she came from. No one asked. She did not speak. The monks assumed she was mute, or perhaps traumatized. But she was calm. Every morning, she woke before the sun. She swept the temple stones with precise, soft strokes. She cleaned bowls, folded robes, and sat in zazen for hours without being told. She became part of the silence. And perhaps because she never asked, they let her stay. Weeks passed. The old abbot began to notice something. The air around the bell had changed. It wasn't sound, not quite, but there was a stillness, thicker, quieter, as if the silence had deepened into listening. One dawn, the abbot woke early to meditate. The courtyard was drenched in pale fog. He moved toward the bell chamber and stopped. There she was. The girl stood before the bell. She wasn't touching it. She simply breathed. Slowly, eyes closed, hands resting gently by her sides. And then, without warning, the bell rang. Not a clang, not a gong, but a tone so low, so deep, that the stones beneath the temple seemed to hum in reply. It was not just sound, it was feeling. The kind that climbs through the soles of your feet and settles in your ribs like a forgotten prayer. Monks rushed from their chambers, Birds fell silent, trees stilled. The girl did not move. The bell had rung, just once, and then silence again. The abbot later asked her, "Child, what did you do?" The girl looked up. "I emptied myself," she said. The monks were puzzled. Emptied of what? The girl tilted her head. Of wanting to ring the bell. That night, the temple glowed differently, not with firelight, but with presence. The kind of presence that blooms when something eternal touches the moment. The bell never rang again, but no one needed it to. Its sound had been heard, and what it awakened was not awe, but stillness. Reflection, Bingjang Chitli. In Zen, there is a koan, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" This story asks, what is the sound of a bell that does not need to ring? The bell is the self, heavy, sacred, full of potential. But it does not awaken through effort, ambition, or spiritual pride. It awakens in the presence of true emptiness. Not emptiness as void, but as openness, as freedom from grasping. The girl did not try to awaken the bell. She did not seek to prove her worth. She simply became presence. And in doing so, the bell, the Dharma, responded. Many of us approach wisdom like those monks, seeking, striving, sitting in postures, performing stillness. But true stillness cannot be performed. It is what remains when we let go of seeking. The bell teaches us this, that even silence can be sacred. And sometimes what changes the world is not a grand noise, but a single moment of complete surrender. Psychological lens, lienhetum lihiendai. For many in midlife and beyond, the ache of striving begins to tire the soul. We've rung many bells, in careers, relationships, possessions. Some rang clear, others left us echoing with disappointment. There comes a point, often quietly, often late at night, when we realize the next answer won't come from trying harder, but from letting go. Letting go of needing recognition, letting go of proving ourselves, letting go of the hope that something outside will complete us. Psychologists speak of the second half of life, not as decline, but as return. A return to essence, to stillness, to the part of you that no longer needs the bell to ring, because you are already the listening. And so, tonight, if something in you feels unanswered, if your bell has not rung, that's okay. Maybe it is not meant to ring now. Maybe it is enough to simply sit beside it, to listen for the space between thoughts, to breathe gently into the hush beneath the noise, because the sound you're waiting for might be waiting for you to stop waiting. Close your eyes now. The temple is still here. The bell is still whole. And somewhere inside you, the silence is already singing. Story 2. The Hermit Who Offered His Silence. In the northern reaches of the kingdom, where the mountains turned blue and breath came out in clouds even in spring, there stood a single cave beneath a wind-swept cliff. No road led to it. No map marked it. Yet pilgrims had always found their way there, guided by word or rumor or yearning. They came in silence, for the man who lived within had not spoken in 60 years. He was once a scholar, they said, a man of brilliance and debate, who taught in the Royal Academy when the capital still bore its old name. But after the death of his only son in a sudden fire, the man walked away from the world and never returned. He took a vow of silence, shaved his head, and wandered into the northern wilderness. There, he built no temple, accepted no students, and left no scriptures. He simply sat, year after year, in cold and sun and storm. People called him the hermit sage of Nien Tuet. Some believed he had lost his mind. Others believed he had found it. No one knew for certain, because he never said a word. One spring, a young prince named Theo, firstborn son of the southern emperor, climbed the long path to the hermit's cave. He came in secret, wearing the robes of a monk. His father thought him on retreat. But Prince Theo had grown restless in the palace. At 25, he had already led armies, negotiated treaties, and won praise for his wisdom. And yet, he could not sleep. Every night, he was visited by the same dream. He stood in a great hall filled with voices, debating, demanding, pleading. But no matter how he responded, no one listened. His words passed through them like wind through reeds. He began to wonder, if words could not touch the heart, what could? So he climbed the mountains in search of the hermit, the man who had spoken to no one, yet to whom thousands listened. When he reached the cave, it was near dusk. Mist hung over the pines like breath held too long. The hermit sat at the mouth of the cave, cross-legged, eyes open, gaze soft as candlelight. Theo bowed deeply. He sat and waited. The hermit said nothing. 3 days passed. The prince fasted, meditated, swept leaves from the stony path. Still, the hermit did not acknowledge him. On the 4th day, Theo spoke. "I came seeking understanding." Silence. "I've studied the 5 classics. I've debated ministers. I've read the sutras. But I still don't know peace." Silence. "I've led men into battle. I've signed decrees that moved 10,000 lives. But I feel hollow." Silence. The prince looked into the hermit's face. It was not harsh. It was not pitying. It was not even neutral. It was simply present. And then, for the first time, the hermit moved. He reached into a small bamboo bowl beside him and pulled out a stone. Smooth, round, nothing remarkable. He held it out to the prince. Confused, Theo accepted it. "Is this an answer?" The hermit closed his eyes and returned to stillness. That night, Theo sat by the fire, turning the stone over in his hands. It was just a rock, no markings, no weight of symbolism. And yet, it was warm from the hermit's hand. It held a trace of something, not meaning, but being. He held it to his chest and, for the first time in many nights, slept. He stayed for 12 more days. Each morning, the hermit sat. The prince sat beside him. They did not speak. They swept the same path, drank from the same stream, ate boiled roots and wild greens. One evening, as the last light slid behind the peaks, Theo turned to the hermit. "I came here because I thought silence was something you practiced." He paused. "But now I see, silence is not a technique. It is a home." The hermit looked at him, not with approval, not with pride, just presence. The kind that holds a soul without needing to change it. On the 15th day, the prince bowed one last time. "I don't need you to speak," he said quietly. "You already have." And he descended the mountain. In the Buddhist tradition, especially Zen, silence is not absence. It is the essence. What is left when all words have burned out? When thoughts no longer clamor for the stage? In Confucian thought, Wisdom often arrives through learning and refinement. In Buddhist thought, wisdom also arrives through unlearning, through returning, through ceasing to grasp. The hermit had nothing to prove, no sermon to give. His silence was not a void, but a vessel, one that could hold the burdens of those who came. The prince came seeking clarity through explanation. What he found was the clarity of stillness, of being witnessed without demand. The stone, it was just a stone. But in silence, even the simplest thing can become a scripture. Psychological insight lien het tam lihin dai. For many of us in adulthood, especially beyond 45, the world grows louder, not quieter. Demands increase, roles stack atop one another, words multiply, but meaning fades. We are praised for being articulate, productive, responsive, but few ask if we are still. If we ever sit and allow something deeper than thoughts to arise, silence can be frightening because it does not flatter the ego. It does not affirm our stories. But silence is not the enemy. It is the soil in which the soul takes root again. Sometimes we don't need another book or another voice telling us what to do. We need the presence of someone who simply listens with their whole being, and we need to become that someone for ourselves. So tonight, if you find yourself searching for answers, for peace, for rest, perhaps don't ask, perhaps don't explain, just sit, as if you were sitting beside that hermit. No demands, no expectations, only the soft breath of the wind and the steady warmth of a stone in your hand. Sleep not as escape, but as return, to the place where silence is not empty, but full of the self you've always been. Story 3. The Monk Who Was Born 3 Times. In the foothills of an ancient land now long forgotten, between wind-swept grasslands and forests of amber pine, there once lived a monk who was said to have been born 3 times. Not reincarnated, born 3 times in a single life. No one remembered his original name. In the scrolls of the old temple, he was simply called the Triple Born. The villagers spoke of him with hushed awe. Some believed he had been blessed by the bodhisattvas themselves. Others whispered that he had endured great sorrow, the kind that cracks the soul until it must begin again as something new. What is known is this. The first time he was born, he was a boy. Born into a noble house during the reign of the Pearl Emperor, he was raised in a palace garden shaded by plum trees. He was a gifted child, curious, kind-eyed, endlessly questioning. By 12, he was fluent in the 4 books. By 16, he was composing poetry so gentle and precise that even the court musicians wept. But the world, as always, was not gentle in return. War came. His city was sieged. One night, as the sky bloomed red with fire, he lost everything: his parents, his sister, his teachers, his home. He wandered for weeks alone through the charred remnants of what once was. When a group of monks found him, collapsed near a frozen stream, he did not speak. He had forgotten how. The abbess who took him in said softly, "You have died." Then, after a pause, "Now you may be born again." And so began his second life. He became a monk, not out of devotion, but from emptiness. His days were filled with sweeping, bowing, fetching water. His nights were sleepless. He did everything asked of him, yet kept a silence so complete it disturbed even the most seasoned of practitioners. Years passed. He grew strong, disciplined, yet his heart was distant, detached. like someone watching the world from behind a silk veil. Then one evening, in the 17th year of his monkhood, a child came to the temple. She was orphaned like he had been. Her eyes held the same haunted light he once carried. The abbess, now old and stooped, asked him to care for her. "I am not a father," he said. "No," she replied, "but you remember what it is to be without one." Reluctantly, he agreed. At first, the child spoke to him only in questions. Why is the bell so big? Why does the wind never get tired? Where do people go when they die? He never answered, but he listened. And in listening, something began to change. He started rising before dawn, not for prayer, but to carve small wooden animals for her to play with. He cooked sweet rice with ginger and let her pour the tea during morning rituals. He tucked her in with chants so quiet they sounded like memory. One night, after she had fallen asleep, he sat beside her mat and wept for the first time in decades. Not from sorrow, but from the strange, painful joy of feeling alive again. That was when he was born a third time, not in the body, but in the heart. He began teaching, not from books, but from presence. He no longer recited sutras by rote. He told stories, sang lullabies, asked questions. He let silence fill the space between words, like the breath between waves. His students noticed. They said his voice had softened, that his touch carried warmth, that his eyes, once empty, now reflected the moon. They asked him one day during the winter ceremony how he came to be so wise. He smiled and said simply, "I died. Then I listened. Then I loved." That was all. When he passed away many years later, his body was found seated in meditation, back straight, lips slightly curved into the shape of a final wordless blessing. No ceremony was held. Instead, the child he once cared for, now an abbess herself, lit a single lantern and placed it beneath the plum tree that had begun to grow beside his hut. Its blossoms opened that same night, though spring was weeks away. And the wind carried his story down the hills, where even now some still say, "To live once is human, to live twice is rare, but to be born 3 times is to understand." Philosophical reflection. In the old teachings, there is a saying, "True rebirth is not of the flesh, but of the heart when it remembers what it forgot." This story is not about supernatural reincarnation. It is about the deep, slow unfolding of the soul, the kind of transformation that comes not from escape, but from staying, from breaking, from listening. The monk's first life was one of potential, a golden beginning lost to tragedy. His second was one of withdrawal, a necessary numbness, a survival of silence. But it was the third life, born of relationship, of small daily acts of care, where awakening truly happened. In Buddhist and Confucian philosophy alike, the path to wisdom is not linear. It loops, it pauses, it burns down and begins again. The monk did not seek greatness. He did not preach. He lived simply. But in his simplicity was a mirror, through which others remembered their own journey. Modern spirituality often speaks of finding your true self, but the ancient wisdom suggests the true self is not found. It is remembered, piece by piece, through love, grief, and quiet service. Psychological insight. In the second half of life, many carry silent sorrow, unprocessed loss, unspoken disappointments, quiet regrets. Sometimes we survive by turning inward. We build walls of routine, of detachment, of duty. We become functional, yet no longer truly alive. But healing does not demand brilliance. It asks for one thing only: connection. With another soul, with a child's question, with the act of offering warmth without expecting return. This is the third birth. Psychologically, this reflects a turning point in many lives, from outer striving to inner integration, from performance to presence, from control to compassion. The monk's story reminds us that no matter how many years have passed, how much has been lost, we can begin again, tonight, now, and again tomorrow. Closing whisper. And so, if you feel you have lived long but not fully, if you carry years but not yet wholeness, let this be your second breath, or your third. Close your eyes. Let the first life fall away. Let the second grow quiet. And let this one, this breath, be the one that begins with listening. The world does not need you to be perfect. It asks only that you return. Softly, gently, like a blossom opening in the snow. Welcome home. Story 4. The Garden of Fallen Leaves. In the southern mountains of Old Yamato, where clouds drifted low across pine-covered slopes, there lay a small Zen monastery known only by a scent. It was called the Temple of Autumn Smoke, not because it burned incense, nor because it celebrated death, but because each morning, as the mist rose through the trees and the leaves began to fall, the world around it seemed to exhale. No map bore its name, no road led directly to it, but those who needed to find it did, often when their hearts were weary and their minds too full of knowing. The abbot was an old man named Ryoshin. He had served for nearly 60 years, yet never once had he given a formal lecture. No scroll bore his teachings, no disciples were named. But every morning, without fail, he would rise before the sun, carry a worn rake in his hand, and sweep the garden. The garden was modest. A simple stone path winding between moss, dry earth, and a scattering of maple trees. But each morning, without fail, leaves would fall. And each morning, Ryoshin would sweep them away. He never rushed, he never sighed. His movements were like breath, rising, pausing, letting go. To outside eyes, it was merely an old man cleaning. But to those who watched long enough, something deeper shimmered beneath each stroke. One autumn, a young monk named Sota came to study at the temple. Sota had trained in many monasteries. He could quote the Diamond Sutra from memory. He knew all the rules of form and silence. He sat in meditation with a back like bamboo and eyes like flint. But he could not rest. His thoughts chased meaning like wolves around a fire. He longed to understand, to crack open the nature of mind and see the truth like lightning across the dark. On his third morning, he found Ryoshin sweeping the path. The old abbot did not look up. Leaves brushed like whispers across the stones. Sota bowed. "Master," he said, "why do you sweep the leaves each morning when more will fall by evening?" Ryoshin smiled, though he did not stop sweeping. "To sweep," he said quietly, "is not to remove the leaves. It is to meet them." Sota frowned. "But the task is endless." "Yes," Ryoshin nodded, "and so is the wind." Days passed. The trees let go of more color. The mornings grew colder. Each day Sota watched the abbot sweep. And each day he grew more agitated. One morning, in frustration, he said, "Is this your practice, raking endlessly what cannot stay clear?" Ryoshin paused. He lifted a single leaf between two fingers. It was curled, half red, half gold, the veins delicate as breath. "When I was young," he said, "I wanted to keep the path clear forever, I swept to fight the fall. He let the leaf go. It fluttered silently to the earth. Now I sweep, he said, so the leaves may fall where they wish. That night, Sota sat long into the darkness. He remembered how many things in his life he had tried to clear away: doubt, fear, anger, the pain of a father who never listened, the ache of always needing to be right. He had tried to sweep his mind into stillness and grew angry when more leaves appeared. But the mind, he realized, was a forest, and forests drop leaves, always. Weeks turned. Sota began to rise earlier. He joined the old abbot in the garden, taking the second rake. At first, his movements were stiff, eager to impress. But over time, his strokes softened, slowed, deepened. One morning, Ryoshin handed him the only rake. "I will not sweep today," he said. "You sweep for us both." Sota bowed. He took the rake. But he did not sweep. Instead, he stood and listened. To the wind moving the branches, to the soft crackle of a single leaf landing near his foot, to his own breath, not forced, not directed, simply present. He did not sweep that day, and yet the garden felt clearer than ever. On the last day of autumn, Ryoshin came to the garden barefoot. He said nothing. He walked slowly to the center of the path and sat. Sota waited. Finally, the abbot spoke. "When I die," he said, "do not rake the garden for 7 days." Sota's eyes widened. "But why?" Ryoshin smiled. "Let the leaves cover everything. Let them fall where they may. Let the world forget order, so it may remember presence." Sota nodded slowly. "And after 7 days?" he asked. The old man's eyes closed. His voice was soft as dusk. "Then, sweep again." That winter, the old abbot passed away, quietly, seated, facing the garden. The monks mourned, and for 7 days no one swept. The garden became a sea of gold and rust and brown. Wind scattered the leaves into temples and corners, over moss and gravel and stone. Some monks wept, others smiled. On the 8th morning, Sota lifted the old rake. He bowed deeply to the earth, and he began to sweep. Philosophical reflection. This story is a lesson in impermanence, not as a tragedy, but as a rhythm. In Buddhism, the leaf falling is not a problem. It is not an error to be corrected. It is the way itself. Western minds often view progress as linear, cleanliness as virtue, order as control. But in the ancient East, order is not rigidity. It is reverence, a harmony with what is, not what should be. The old monk swept not to preserve perfection, but to be present with what is always changing. The young monk struggled, as many of us do, to accept that the mind, like the garden, will never stay clean for long. Thoughts fall, emotions swirl, pain reappears. But the practice is not to stop the leaves. It is to meet them, again and again with compassion. To sweep, not to control, but to remember that even fallen things deserve care. Psychological insight. Many adults, especially in later life, wrestle with the same questions as Sota. Why do I keep facing the same emotions? Why does the pain return? Why does healing feel like sweeping leaves that keep falling? But healing is not a one-time clearing. It is a rhythm, a practice, a kind of loving maintenance. When we shift from fixing ourselves to being with ourselves, transformation begins. The garden of the mind is never empty, but it can be tended, and in the tending there is peace, not because it is done, but because we are doing it gently. So tonight, If your mind feels messy, if thoughts swirl like autumn wind, if emotions fall like leaves at your feet, don't rush to clear them. Sit a while, let them settle. Then, when your breath is soft again, pick up your rake and sweep. Not to control, but to return, to presence, to care. The leaves will fall again tomorrow, but tonight, the garden is enough, and so are you. Story 5. The Bowl That Refused to Be Filled. Long ago, when the old rivers still followed the stars, and kings sought counsel from monks instead of generals, there lived a novice named Han in the stone monastery of Clouded Grove. He was young, tall, and full of fire. Among the 30 monks, Han was the most eager. He awoke before the others, sat the longest in meditation, copied sutras by moonlight, and asked questions long after the bell had rung for silence. But his eyes were always reaching. He wanted enlightenment, wanted to grasp it, name it, hold it up like a lamp above the minds of others. His teacher, Master Dogen, said nothing to discourage him. The old monk rarely spoke at all. He tended the vegetable garden and swept the temple gates, humming tunes from forgotten times. His robes were patched with different seasons. One day, after 6 years of study, Han was invited to take up the bowl. It was a simple ritual. When a novice was ready to become a mendicant monk, he would receive a begging bowl, his only possession, and begin his daily practice of walking into the village to collect food. The bowl symbolized humility, dependence, non-attachment. But Han did not see it that way. To him, the bowl was a step toward mastery. It meant he was progressing, moving upward, nearing the truth he so desperately sought. So when Master Dogen handed him an old wooden bowl wrapped in cloth, Han bowed deeply, his hands trembling with pride. "Thank you, Master," he said. "I will fill it with merit." Dogen smiled, a small, sad smile. "It is not meant to be filled," he said quietly. But Han did not understand. From the first morning, Han took to his begging path with devotion. He stood tall, walked mindfully, bowed gracefully before each home. The villagers were kind. They offered rice, steamed vegetables, warm broth, small coins for the temple. But Han noticed something strange. No matter how much was offered, the bowl never seemed full. At first, he thought it was a trick of his mind. He doubled back to count. He measured each portion, folded cloth beneath the base to lift the offerings. Still, the bowl remained wanting. He tried different routes, visited wealthier homes, recited mantras before leaving. But day after day, he returned to the temple with a bowl that never brimmed. One morning, frustrated, Han approached Master Dogen. "Master," he said, "this bowl, it is flawed. It leaks, or perhaps is enchanted. I cannot fill it, no matter how much is given." Dogen looked at the bowl, ran a wrinkled thumb along its rim. "Ah," he said, "you are discovering its nature." Han frowned. "Its nature?" The master nodded. It was carved from a tree that once stood alone on a wind-swept cliff. Its wood was dry, cracked, empty. The artisan who made it gave it no bottom. Han stared. "No bottom? But that makes it useless." Or perfectly honest. Han stormed away. He could not believe the bowl was flawed by design. Surely it was symbolic. Surely the master was testing him. So he doubled his efforts. He begged longer, bowed lower, prayed harder. He told himself the bowl would be filled if only his karma were pure enough, if only his merit were strong, if only he tried more, wanted more, gave more. But each evening when he sat to eat, he stared into a bowl that held nothing. And slowly something in him began to ache, not hunger, but shame. One dusk, after returning empty once again, Han did not go to the dining hall. He did not sit for evening meditation. Instead, he took the bowl and walked far into the forest, beyond the temple grounds, beyond the stone lanterns and moss paths. He came to a clearing. There, he placed the bowl on the earth and shouted, "What do you want from me?" The trees said nothing. The wind moved gently through the bamboo. He fell to his knees. "I have given everything," he whispered. "My time, my effort, my pride. I have emptied myself." The bowl sat still, open, silent. Han closed his eyes, and something within him cracked. A small, clean break, not of bone or thought, but of insistence. He no longer needed to be full. He no longer needed to succeed. He just was. A young monk, in the woods, on the ground, beside an empty bowl. And for the first time in years, he felt peace. The next morning, Han returned the bowl to Master Dogen. "I understand now," he said softly. "The bowl was never meant to hold anything." Dogen took it gently in his hands. "No," he said, "it is meant to receive everything and keep nothing." Han bowed, and the next day he returned to the village with the same bowl, but he walked differently. He did not look for more. He did not measure. He did not wish. He simply received and gave and walked. Philosophical reflection. This story touches the heart of Buddhist teaching. Emptiness is not a lack. It is the space in which all things arise and pass. The bowl is not broken. It is honest. It teaches us that the path is not about accumulation, not of wisdom, not of merit, not even of peace. It is about release. Mastery in the Dharma is not reaching some elevated state. It is letting go of the desire to possess one. We live in a world obsessed with fullness, of achievement, identity, validation. But the old bowl reminds us, when we are too full, there is no room for the sacred. Only when we become empty can we truly hold anything. Psychological insight. Modern life trains us to chase success, perfection, answers. We internalize the belief that if we try hard enough, give enough, heal enough, we will finally feel whole. But like Han's bowl, our inner self cannot be filled from the outside. No achievement, no affirmation, no amount of giving will complete the self that still clings. True healing begins when we stop trying to become something and allow ourselves to simply be. Acceptance, presence, surrender. These are not passive states. They are active practices of great courage. To walk with an empty bowl and peace in the heart is perhaps the rarest attainment of all. Closing whisper. Tonight, if you feel incomplete, if you are weary from striving, if your bowl feels endlessly empty, do not despair. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are learning to carry the sacred, not by grasping, but by letting go. Close your eyes. Let go of needing to be full. Let go of trying to be enough. You already are. And in the quiet of your breath, the bowl is waiting, not to be filled, but to be free. Story 6. The Woman Who Gave Away the Moon. Long ago, in a remote village nestled between mist-covered cliffs and tea fields that rolled like green waves toward the horizon, there lived an old woman named Kaede. Her hut stood alone on the farthest edge of the village, where the ground began to slope into forest. It was small, just enough for a bed of straw, a kettle, and a window that opened to the night sky. She had no family, no visitors, no gold or cattle or land. Only two things: a wooden bowl with a long crack down its side, and a deep, quiet smile that never seemed to leave her face. Every evening, as dusk fell and the temple bell in the valley let out its final chime, Kaede would place her bowl just outside her hut. Then she would sit on the stone step, facing the moon, and whisper a single word: offering. No food, no coin, no flowers, just the bowl and her presence. Villagers passing by thought her senile. Kaede is offering an empty bowl to the gods, they said. Perhaps she has lost her mind. But the children liked her. They said she smelled of roasted chestnuts and rain. Sometimes she told them stories. Other times she would just sit quietly beside them, humming songs with no words. One curious boy, Ren, once asked her, "Why do you offer nothing?" Kaede smiled. "Who says it's nothing?" He peered into the bowl, but it's empty. She looked up at the moon and whispered, "Then you're not seeing what I'm giving." In the region, there was a shrine known for its power to bless abundance. Merchants, lords, and travelers from distant provinces would make long pilgrimages to offer incense, gold, and even rare silks in hopes of receiving fortune in return. One year, during the harvest festival, the monks of that shrine made an announcement. The most sincere offering this season will receive a blessing that cannot fade, one that no fire, flood, or time can steal. The village stirred with excitement. Farmers saved their finest rice. Silk traders sent runners with bolts of cloth. Even the local lord ordered a carved jade lion to be sent with his seal. Kaede, too, heard the news. That night, as the moon rose full and golden, she placed her cracked bowl outside her hut as always. But this time, she turned it upside down. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Tonight, I give the moon." The next morning, without word or procession, Kaede picked up her bowl and began the long walk to the shrine. The path was steep and lined with pilgrims. Some carried baskets of dried persimmons. Others led donkeys draped in embroidered cloth. Kaede carried only her upside-down bowl. People laughed. "She's bringing an empty vessel to the gods." But Kaede walked steadily, eyes soft, breath even. When she arrived, she placed the bowl before the shrine's altar, bowed 3 times, and stepped back. The attending monk looked at her offering with confusion. "Elder," he asked gently, "have you brought nothing?" Kaede smiled. "No, I have brought what I have always had." "And what is that?" She gestured to the bowl. "The moon." He blinked. "Pardon?" "I turned my bowl over last night," she said, "and caught the full moon's reflection in it. That is my offering." The monk was silent. Around them others whispered. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. But the head abbot, who had been watching from behind a screen of silk, stepped forward. He approached Kaede. "Tell me, grandmother," he said, "why give the moon?" She turned to him, face like a still pond. "Because it's all I could never lose," she said, "and all I never owned." The abbot bowed low. That night, a strange thing happened. All the fine offerings, gold, rice, silks, were placed in the offering hall. But by morning, everyone had disappeared, gone. Only Kaede's bowl remained, still empty, still upside down. The villagers were bewildered. The monks searched. No signs of theft, no footprints, no broken doors. But the abbot said only this: "What can be stolen was never truly given. And to Kaede, he gave a blessing in return, silence, wide as the sky. She returned to her hut, placed the bowl on her shelf, never spoke of it again. But from that day on, people noticed something. When they passed by her home on moonlit nights, the air seemed warmer, softer, as if a quiet song was being sung by the grass. And when sorrow came, when crops failed or children were lost, people found themselves drawn to her hut, not for answers, but to sit in silence beside a cracked bowl that once held the moon. Philosophical reflection. This story whispers of the Buddhist concept of non-possession, of offering not what we can hold, but what we can release. Kaede's bowl was not empty. It held reflection, intention, reverence. She gave something vast that cost nothing, something that could not be stolen because it was never clung to. In Zen, true offering is not in the object, but in the emptiness behind it, the letting go, the sincerity, the act of presence. She gave what was already everyone's, and yet entirely hers. And in doing so, reminded the world, we are not impoverished by what we lack, but enriched by what we no longer need to keep. Psychological insight. In later life, many struggle with identity after loss of career, youth, roles, even physical ability. We ask, what do I still have to give? Kaede's story reminds us, we always have presence, stillness, the ability to witness beauty and reflect it back. Her cracked bowl is the aging self, imperfect, time-worn, yet capable of holding light. Even as memories fade or roles dissolve, we remain vessels of quiet radiance. To give the moon is to give the invisible gifts, attention, wonder, peace. These are the offerings that never fade. Closing whisper. Tonight, if you feel you have little left, if your hands are empty, if the world seems to ask for more than you can give, remember the bowl, remember the moon. Turn yourself gently toward the light and let it reflect in the silence of your being. You are not here to hoard beauty. You are here to offer it, even when your hands hold nothing, especially then. So rest now, and if you wake in the night, look out your window. Perhaps the moon is still waiting to be given away by someone who no longer needs to keep it. Story 7. The 3 Questions Before Enlightenment. In the mountains of ancient Liang, where pine trees leaned toward the wind as if whispering secrets to the sky, there stood a monastery of black-tiled roofs and silent thresholds. It was known as the Gate of No Gate. Built with no walls, no formal entrance, and no signage, it accepted no students through application. Only those who truly sought truth could find it, and only those who truly doubted themselves were allowed to stay. The master of this monastery was called Shiho, though no one addressed him by name. They called him the one who asks 3 times. Because before anyone was accepted into the monastery, the seeker had to answer 3 questions. They were simple, wordless even, but none who answered carelessly ever stayed. One winter, a boy of 17 named Liang arrived at the monastery gates. He was barefoot, cloaked in dust. He had walked from the Eastern River province across 200 miles of fields and forest, guided by rumors and a restless ache inside his chest. He had read the sutras. He had served the village monk. He had copied scrolls until his fingers bled, but none of it had quieted his mind. He believed that in the monastery of the Gate of No Gate, Something real waited. At the entrance, a novice brought him rice and tea. He waited in silence until evening. When the sun slipped behind the mountains and the cold gathered like breath on stone, the master appeared. He was old, not frail, but weathered like bark that had seen 1,000 rains. His eyes were clear but not sharp. They held no judgment, only time. He looked at the boy and said nothing. Then he raised a finger and drew 3 invisible lines in the air. 1, 2, 3. Then he pointed to the ground. The boy knew. The first question had begun. The novice who had brought him food whispered, "You must answer, where do you come from?" Lang bowed and replied, "I come from the river province." The master blinked once, slowly, then turned and walked away. The boy remained at the gate for the night. The next morning he tried again. The master came at dawn. Again, 3 lines in the air. Again, a finger to the ground. The same question, "Where do you come from?" This time the boy paused. He closed his eyes and said, "I come from desire." The master did not move, but this time he did not leave. He sat down on the stone beside the gate and motioned for the boy to sit. Then he raised his hand again. 3 lines. This time, the second question. The novice whispered, "Who are you?" The boy breathed deeply. He said, "I am a seeker." The master tilted his head. The boy hesitated. "I am the one asking the question." The master looked at him for a long moment, then rose and left. The boy stayed outside for 5 more days. Snow fell, his hands cracked, his legs trembled, but he did not leave. On the 6th morning, the master returned. 3 lines, a finger in the air, pointing beyond the mountains. The novice whispered, "Where are you going?" The boy bowed, and this time he did not speak immediately. He looked at the snow, at the wind moving through the pines, and emptiness inside him, and said, "I do not know." The master smiled, softly, and turned to the gate. This time he held it open. The boy entered the monastery, not as a student, not as a monk, but as one who no longer needed to be either. He stayed there for 40 years. He never wrote a single text, never gave a single sermon, but the students who came after said his presence felt like sitting beside a still pond. They said his silence was not empty, but full of echo. They called him Liang the Unknowing, and when they asked what enlightenment was, he would only smile, then draw 3 lines in the air and say nothing. Philosophical reflection. These 3 questions, where do you come from, who are you, where are you going, are not meant to be answered with facts. They are the ancient mirrors of self. In Buddhist and Confucian traditions, identity is not fixed. It is neither name nor role. It is a movement, a rhythm, a remembering. To say, "I come from desire," is to admit the engine of seeking. To say, "I am the questioner," is to realize you are both the question and the one who asks it. And to say, "I do not know where I am going," is not ignorance, it is humility. Only when the seeker lets go of needing an answer does the truth arrive. The boy passed the gate not by mastering knowledge, but by surrendering the illusion of knowing. This is the first breath of awakening. Psychological insight. In later life, we are often confronted again with the very questions we believed we had answered. Where did I come from? Who am I now that my roles have changed? Where am I going now that the horizon has shifted? These questions are not crises. They are invitations.
We spend our youth building identity. In midlife and beyond, we are asked to disassemble it, gently, to return to essence. Unknowing is not weakness, it is spaciousness. To live without fixed answers is to walk in freedom. To dwell in the question is to dwell in presence. So tonight, if you find yourself asking quietly, in the soft ache of midnight, where did I go wrong? Who have I become? What happens next? Let the questions be your teacher. Do not rush to answer. Sit beside them. Breathe with them. Let them open, not close. You are not behind. You are at the gate. And sometimes the most honest reply is, I do not know. And in that space, the door begins to open. Story 8. The Room with No Shadows. There was once a temple built high above the cliffs of the Western Range, where the sun rose like a breath and disappeared into the mouth of the ocean. The temple had no name, for it was older than language. Carved into the face of the mountain, its halls held secrets older than kings.
But what pilgrims came to see was not the relics, nor the statues, nor the scrolls tucked beneath ivory bones. They came for a single room, a room with no shadows. It was not magic. There were no lamps, no flames, no glowing stones from fallen stars. It was built with precise mathematics. Walls curved to catch every angle of light, polished stones that reflected softly, floor tiles arranged to mirror the ceiling. The architects were nameless, long vanished into wind and earth. But their work remained. And in that room, it was said, no matter the hour, no matter the season, there were no shadows. Not even under your feet, not behind your ears, not beneath your eyes. For the monks who lived in the temple, the room was not a curiosity, it was a practice. They called it Shikan no Ma, the room of nothing but seeing. It was used for one thing only, learning how not to react. When young monks struggled with anger, they were sent to sit in the room, not as punishment, but as a mirror. Because when you have no shadow, you see only yourself. There was once a monk named Iji. He had been taken in as a boy after his father was killed in a land dispute and his mother disappeared into the dust of exile. The monks found him outside the temple walls one winter morning, fists clenched, breath steaming in fury, pounding a dead tree with his bare hands. They took him in, fed him, clothed him, gave him a new name. He trained diligently, memorized sutras, chopped wood, fasted, endured long nights of cold silence. But his anger remained, quiet, buried, like embers beneath ashes. It showed itself in moments, a tightened jaw, a sharp breath, a refusal to bow just slightly enough. He didn't shout, but he resisted. He didn't strike, but he closed. One day, after a meditation in which he snapped a bamboo rod meant for walking mindfully, the old abbot said only this, "Tomorrow you will sit in the room." Iji said nothing, but inside something tightened. He thought, I am not a child. Still, the next morning he entered the room of no shadows. He sat cross-legged on the stone floor, spine upright, eyes half closed. At first, he noticed the light. It was everywhere, but soft, not glaring, not dim, gentle, like the hush after snowfall. He looked at his hands, no shadow. He waved a finger slowly, no outline followed. He felt dizzy, like the world had folded around him. He closed his eyes. Inside, the shadow was still there. Hours passed. Thoughts rose. They think I am broken. They want me to vanish. They fear my strength. He swallowed hard, tried to breathe, but the room gave him no place to hide. He opened his eyes again. The light met him, soft, relentless. Without edges, he could not blame the world. He could only sit. By evening, he began to cry, not loudly, not with drama, but with the steady, quiet tears of someone realizing no one is coming to rescue him from himself. He whispered, "Why won't it leave me?" And the silence answered, "Because you are still carrying it." He did not leave the room that night. He stayed, through the dark that was not dark, through the dawn that held no golden line. He sat, unmoving, not because he had mastered something, but because he had stopped trying to control it. When he emerged the next morning, his face was calm, not blank, not serene, but like stone that had accepted the shape of the river. He bowed deeply to the abbot, and the old man nodded. Nothing else was said. Years later, when E.G. became a teacher, he never shouted. When students broke rules, he did not scold. He only walked them, slowly, to the room, and sat with them, not to instruct, but to witness. He never forced a lesson. He let the room do the teaching. Because once you have seen your own shadow disappear, once you realize the anger you feared was your own reflection, you never react the same again. Philosophical reflection. The room with no shadows is not a place of magic. It is a metaphor of truth. In Buddhism, anger is not evil. It is a form of clinging to justice, to identity, to control. What we call reaction is often a shadow, a habit of mind, a shape we cast unknowingly on the world. When we remove the external triggers, the excuses, the mirrors, we are left with only the root, the unexamined wound. And once we see it without distortion, it no longer controls us. The room teaches not to suppress emotion, but to sit with it, without escaping. And in doing so, we meet it fully, and then it begins to dissolve. Psychological insight. Many adults carry old anger, not loud rage, but quiet tension, a resistance to being hurt again, a story that has repeated for decades. Often, it's not about the current moment. It's about old pain that was never allowed to surface, old injustice, old betrayal. Modern therapy speaks of sitting with emotion, but ancient wisdom taught it through practice, not analysis. Silence, presence, light that does not blame. The room with no shadows is the part of you that stops looking outward and starts listening inward. It does not judge, it simply shows, and what is fully seen slowly softens. So tonight, if something in you feels tight, if your heart still clenches when no one is looking, if you are tired of reacting before you even know why, let yourself sit, not to fix, not to change, but to be with what you've carried so long. Close your eyes. Imagine the light, soft, even, patient. No shadow behind you, no reflection to fight, just presence. Stay a while and breathe. You may find that what you feared was never your enemy. It was only your echo, waiting to be held, until it no longer needed to shout. Story 9. The Last Spoonful of Porridge. It was the year of the fading grain. The snow came early, the rivers turned to stone, and even the bamboo cracked from within. In the northern valley of Takushin, nestled between two crumbling ridgelines, sat a monastery with crooked eaves and mossy stones. It was old, poor, and mostly forgotten. The roof leaked, the walls sighed in the wind, and the monks survived not by donations or support from lords, but by the soil beneath their feet. But that winter, The soil gave nothing. The autumn rice had withered too soon. The root cellar was nearly bare. By the end of the second snow, the monks were eating only thin porridge, mostly water, with a handful of barley for each bowl. Even the rats left the temple. One night, as the monks gathered for their silent meal, the abbot stood before them holding an empty pot. "There is only one bowl left," he said. "After this, there will be nothing." No one moved. Then an old nun named Soen rose. She was the oldest of them all. Her back curved like a question mark, her hands folded in the sleeves of her worn robe. "I will not eat tonight," she said. The abbot frowned. "That is not for you to decide." But Soen bowed gently. "I have eaten enough in this life." She turned and walked outside into the snow. The others ate in silence. Each was given half a ladle, a memory of food, steam rising like a prayer. When the last spoonful remained, the abbot hesitated. Then he ladled it into a small clay bowl and carried it to the temple steps. There, in the snow, sat Soen, wrapped in silence, eyes open to the moon. He placed the bowl before her and bowed. She looked at it. Then she looked to the trees. A small sound caught her ear, rustling, soft, labored. From beneath a bush, a thin blackbird emerged, its wing twisted, feathers matted. Soen picked up the bowl, cupped it in her hands. Then she knelt and offered the last spoonful of porridge to the bird. It tilted its head. Then, with trembling steps, it ate, slowly, gratefully. When it finished, Soen lifted the bowl. It was clean. She bowed to the bird, and the bird, oddly, bowed back. Then it disappeared into the trees. The monks never saw it again. But that night, the wind changed. The next morning, the sky cleared for the first time in weeks. Sunlight spilled across the roof, and there, on the temple steps, sat a woven basket. Inside, bags of rice, roots, dried mushrooms, tea leaves, even fresh fruit. No note, no tracks in the snow, no sound, only warmth. The monks rejoiced. But the abbot stood still. He turned to Soen and asked, "What did you do?" She looked at the rising sun and said, "I offered what I could." He frowned. "To whom?" She smiled softly, "To what was hungry." Years later, when the temple had grown again, when students returned and food was once again abundant, they made a statue of Soen. Not grand, not gilded, just a figure seated beneath a tree, holding a bowl, and at her feet a small black bird carved from obsidian. No inscription, no title, just the silence of offering. Philosophical reflection. This story is a meditation on dana, the practice of giving. In Buddhist teachings, the merit of an offering is not in its size, but in its sincerity. Soen gave not from abundance, but from the heart that no longer clung to self. In Zen, such acts go beyond intention. They are spontaneous, arising from presence, not plan. The last spoonful of porridge was more than food. It was life. And Soen offered it not to another human, not to a deity, but to a fragile bird. This is true giving, beyond logic, beyond reward. The universe, moved by such purity, returns it, not always as expected, but always as needed. Sometimes the basket appears, sometimes the giver becomes the blessing itself. Psychological insight. In times of scarcity, whether food, love, time, or hope, we are trained to tighten our grip. But healing begins when we release, even a little. The last spoonful may be all we have, But sometimes what we give in presence becomes more powerful than what we keep in fear. Soen was old. She had no future to save. Yet she acted from abundance, not depletion. This reflects a profound shift in emotional maturity, the move from survival to service. Many in later life wonder, what do I still have to offer? The answer is not in productivity, but in presence. Compassion, born of lived experience, becomes the true gift, even if it is just a bowl of warm water and barley. So tonight, if you feel you have little left, if you are saving the last part of yourself, afraid of giving it away, pause, hold that spoonful in your heart, and ask, what is hungry around me? Maybe it's not a person. Maybe it's a memory, a silence, a creature no one else sees. And maybe what you give to it will return to you in ways you cannot yet imagine. So breathe and give gently. You are not empty. You are overflowing when you give without needing to be full. Story 10. The Old Man Who Drew Water from a Dry Well. There was once a village on the edge of the sun-bleached plains, where the wind spoke in dust and the land cracked like old pottery. The villagers called the place Kiganmura, the village of hope, though no one remembered why. It had not rained in 3 years. The riverbeds were bones. The once lush paddies were brittle like old scrolls. Wells had dried to silence. The people rationed water like gold, measuring it by tears. And yet, every morning at dawn, one old man carried his wooden yoke across the dry square, lowered his 2 empty buckets into the center well, and pulled them up drop by drop, as though it still flowed. His name was Gen. He was 83. He walked bent, slow, his steps like ink on parchment. But his grip on the rope was steady. He never missed a day. Children would laugh. He draws from ghosts. Others whispered, he's lost his mind. The well is dust. And yet he kept returning, lowering the rope, drawing it back, carrying the empty buckets up the hill to the shrine where his wife was buried. There he would pour nothing onto the parched earth, then bow and walk back. One morning, a boy named Isamu followed him. He had seen the old man in the square, curious why someone would perform a ritual so clearly empty. Isamu approached and said, "Grandfather, why do you draw from a well that holds no water?" Gen looked up. His face was leathered by sun, but his eyes were soft as old silk. "Who told you it's empty?" The boy frowned. "Everyone. There hasn't been water here in years." The old man smiled. "Then why does it keep giving?" He held up his fingers. They were wet. Isamu leaned in. There, on the inside of the bucket, a small, trembling pool of moisture. Barely more than dew. The boy blinked. "But that's nothing." Gen looked to the sky. "It's everything." He told the boy a story. "When I was your age, this well saved our village. The river had dried, crops failed. But this well gave us enough to live, a handful at a time. Now," he said, "it offers only memory." "Then why come?" Isamu asked. Gen placed a hand on the rope. "Because gratitude is not just for what is, it is for what was and what may be again." As the boy grew older, he saw fewer people visit the square. The fields shrank. Families moved away. But Gen remained. Each morning, the walk, the rope, the slow draw, the offering. One winter, the old man did not appear. By midday, a small group climbed the hill to his hut. They found him seated on the wooden porch, buckets beside him. His eyes were closed, his hands still resting on the rope, as if mid-prayer. He had passed silently, as he had lived. The villagers buried him beside his wife. The shrine looked the same, wind-blown, quiet. But that night, clouds gathered for the first time in many seasons. And by morning it rained. Not a torrent, not a flood, but a soft, steady rain, enough to darken the soil, to bring steam from the thirsty ground, to make the children shout and the elders weep. And when the villagers returned to the square, the old well, long thought forgotten, had begun to glisten. At the bottom, visible now in the light of early morning, was a single pool of clear water. They said it was just the rain. But the boy, now grown, knew better. He picked up Jen's buckets, still by the rope, and he too began to draw. Philosophical reflection. This story is a teaching of perseverance without result, of faith not based on outcome, but on integrity. Jen was not drawing water. He was drawing presence. He was continuing a ritual not because it worked, but because it remembered. In Buddhism, we practice not to achieve something, but to become someone. To bow even when no one watches. To give even when we are not repaid. To draw water from what appears dry, because we trust that emptiness is not the end. The old man's practice was not about water. It was about being water, slow, quiet, steady. And, in time, the well responded, not just to rain, but to right action. In Zen, it is said, dig one well deeply, not many shallow ones. Even when dry, keep digging, especially then. Psychological insight. For many, especially in the second half of life, it becomes tempting to stop trying. After disappointments, betrayals, losses, we wonder, what's the point? Why keep praying, meditating, giving, if nothing seems to change? But emotional healing is like Jen's well. It may seem dry on the surface, but each act of gentle attention, each draw, each breath, each offering reaches deeper. And one day, without fanfare, a shift occurs. A softness returns. A memory heals. A little water appears. We are not healed all at once. We are healed drop by drop. Closing whisper. So tonight, if your well feels dry, if your heart has been drawing from silence, if your days feel like empty buckets, don't stop. Lower the rope again, not because you are guaranteed water, but because something inside you remembers what it means to serve, to show up, to offer presence even when nothing comes back. Close your eyes. Feel the rope in your hands. Feel the echo of the old man's footsteps. Feel the stillness of the well that waits. And know, what is dry is not dead, and what you offer now may bring rain for someone you will never meet. Story 11. The Emperor and the Clay Lamp. In the high capital of the Eastern Dynasty, where gold flowed like river water and the roofs of the palace shimmered beneath the noon sun, lived an emperor known for his love of brightness. He adorned his court with jade lanterns and mirrored halls. He wore robes threaded with crushed pearl. In the palace garden, lotus ponds were lit at night with floating orbs that burned whale oil imported from distant shores. Let no corner of this kingdom remain in darkness, he once proclaimed, and his scribes carved the decree in stone. But despite the light, the emperor could not sleep. Each night, he lay beneath silk covers, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows flicker from lanterns that never went out. His mind, always full, spun like a wheel with no center. Physicians gave him herbs, monks offered chants, Courtesans whispered lullabies. Still, sleep did not come. Finally, an old minister approached. "There is a man," he said, "who lives in the hills of Nansei province. A former scholar, now a hermit. They say he owns nothing, speaks rarely, and sleeps every night without effort." The emperor raised an eyebrow. "And why should I care for a peasant's slumber?" "Because," said the minister, "he carries a lamp made of clay, and wherever he goes, it shines, though it burns no oil." The emperor scoffed. Superstition! But that night, as he lay once more in restless silence, he thought of the man. And the next morning, he ordered a journey. It took 4 days to reach the province, 2 more to locate the hermit's hut. It stood on a hillside, overlooking mist-covered fields, shaded by a tree whose name no one remembered. The hut had no door, only a cloth that moved with the wind. Inside, the hermit sat cross-legged. His beard was like unraveled linen, his robe plain. In front of him, on a low wooden table, sat a single clay lamp. It was cracked, unpainted, uneven in shape, and yet it glowed. Not with fire, not with heat, but with a soft, steady light, the kind that makes no shadow. The emperor entered. He did not kneel. He said, "I am told you do not suffer from sleeplessness." The hermit nodded. The emperor pointed to the lamp, and that this is why. The hermit looked at it, then at the emperor. "That is not a lamp," he said. The emperor frowned. "It glows." The hermit replied, "So does a face in love." The emperor sat across from him. "I have lamps worth cities," he said, "and still I do not rest." The hermit tilted his head. "Perhaps," he said, "because your lamps shine outward." The emperor frowned. "And yours?" "It reminds me to look inward." He offered the lamp to the emperor. It was light in the hand, but not fragile, rough to the touch, warm, though it held no flame. The emperor stared at it. "What makes it glow?" The hermit smiled. "What makes you glow?" The emperor was silent. Then he said, "Power." The hermit said nothing. "Achievement, honor, vision." Still, the hermit said nothing. "Then what?" the emperor demanded. The hermit spoke gently. "Peace." That night, the emperor stayed in the hut. There was no bed, no silk, no incense, only stillness. And for the first time in many years, he slept, not from exhaustion, but from release. When he returned to the palace, he did not take the lamp. Instead, he had a replica made, not of gold, but of clay, crafted by the temple potters. He placed it beside his bed. It gave off no light. But each night, before sleeping, he would look at it and breathe. And slowly, night after night, he found himself falling not into sleep, but into surrender. He ruled for many more years. He kept his mirrored halls, his lotus ponds, his jeweled corridors. But when asked what gave him rest, he said only this: a cracked clay lamp, and the memory of a man who no longer needed light to see. Philosophical reflection. This story touches the essence of inner stillness. The emperor, surrounded by brilliance, could not rest, because outward light cannot calm an inward storm. In Buddhist and Taoist traditions, true peace comes not from acquisition, but from return. Return to breath, to being, to presence. The clay lamp, imperfect and humble, symbolizes awareness, steady, quiet, unburning. In Zen, it is said, "When the mind is clear, the lamp is lit. When the lamp is lit, the path disappears." Because the lamp was never meant to show the world. It was meant to show the way back to the self. Psychological insight. In our age, like the emperors, we are flooded with stimulation,
Screens, lights, noise, achievement. And yet, we cannot sleep. Because the nervous system does not respond to brilliance. It responds to safety, to rhythm, to quiet. The cracked clay lamp is the nervous system at rest, worn, unadorned, constant. Healing in midlife and beyond often means giving up the chase, not for success, but for rest. And rest is not found in more. It is found in less, in looking inward without judgment, in letting the glow return, not from fire, but from breath. So, tonight, if your mind still hums with unfinished tasks, if the day clings to your chest like armor, if no light feels gentle enough to sleep beneath, close your eyes. Imagine the clay lamp, not warm, not glowing, but simply present. It does not push darkness away. It does not need to, because you are not here to shine. You are here to settle, to soften, to let the night carry you back to the place where light was never needed, because peace was already within. Story 12. The Fisherman Who Never Cast a Net. Along the slow bend of the great Mekong River, where mist hangs like silk in the early morning and birds glide close to the water's surface, there once lived a fisherman who never fished. He had a boat, long, narrow, carved from old teak, and 2 oars worn smooth from time. He had nets, well knotted and strong. He had the hands of a riverman, calloused, patient, brown as earth. But no one ever saw him cast. Each morning, he rowed out just before sunrise, as the fog still hugged the banks. He would glide to the center of the river, drop anchor, and sit. For hours, sometimes until noon, sometimes until dusk. Then he rowed back, empty-handed. No fish, no catch, no profit. The villagers called him Liam. Some said he had lost his mind after the death of his son. Others whispered that he had once been a great fisherman, now in mourning, seeking forgiveness from the river. Children called him the dreaming boat. But Liam said nothing. He simply returned, day after day, and sat upon the water like a rock held gently by the current. One morning, a novice monk named Kwa approached the dock. He had been sent to the village temple after years of study, hoping to learn not just texts, but the rhythm of ordinary lives. Yet he found himself restless. His mind still swirled with questions. His meditations were shallow. His dreams were loud. He had heard of Liam, the man who floated, who did nothing. He wanted to understand. When he found the fisherman preparing to launch, Kwa bowed. "May I join you?" he asked. Lim looked at him, then at the river, then nodded. They set off in silence. The river was smooth that day, the sun not yet risen. A heron passed overhead, wings so wide it seemed to carry the sky with it. Kwa waited, expecting the man to reach for his nets. He did not. Instead, Lim closed his eyes and let the boat drift. Minutes passed, then hours. Finally, Kwa broke the silence. "You are called a fisherman," he said, "but you do not fish." Liam opened one eye. "Do you need a bowl to be a monk?" Kwa frowned. "Yes." "Then what is a monk when he breaks it?" Kwa said nothing. The wind shifted. The boat rocked gently. Kwa tried again. "Are you waiting for the right fish?" "No," Liam said. "Then why come out here?" Lim looked across the water. "To stop needing the fish." Kwa furrowed his brow. "But without catching, how do you live?" Lim smiled. "I live better now." He explained slowly that years ago he had been like every other man on the river, rising early, casting nets, hauling in whatever could be sold or eaten. He had a family, a house, a name carried with pride. But one year, during the monsoon, his boat overturned in a sudden storm. His son, only 7, was swept away. They never found the body. Liam blamed the river. Then he blamed himself. Then, exhausted from grief, he returned to the water, not to fish, but to sit. He did not know what he sought, but as the weeks passed, he began to listen, to the water, to the wind, to his own breath. And something softened, not the grief, but the grasping. He stopped needing the river to give, and strangely, the river did. Sometimes, when he returned to shore, fish would be waiting in the shallows, as if delivered by the current. Sometimes, a stranger would appear at his hut, offering a bundle of rice or dried mango or sweet roots. He had stopped asking, stopped counting, and still, he never went hungry. Kwa sat in silence. The monk who had memorized the Heart Sutra now felt its truth settle like dew on his chest. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. The man who did not fish was more fed than those who pulled in nets. They stayed on the water until dusk. As they rowed back, Kwa asked one final question. "Do you ever miss casting?" Liam thought for a long while, then said, "Sometimes, but I don't miss needing to." He handed the monk a small wooden carving, a fish, smooth and unfinished. "Keep it," he said, "to remind you that not everything must be caught to be received." That night, Kwa sat longer than usual in meditation. He placed the wooden fish before him. And for the first time, he did not try to quiet the mind. He simply sat and listened, and found the river was already flowing, even within. Philosophical reflection. This story echoes the Buddhist principle of non-grasping, the letting go of control, outcome, and striving. Liam did not renounce fishing from disgust or despair, but from transformation. His grief brought him to stillness, and in stillness, he discovered sufficiency beyond seeking. To not cast a net is not laziness, it is the deepest trust. In Zen, it is said, "When you stop trying to catch the moon, you realize it has been reflected in the water all along." The fish that comes unasked, the offering that appears unearned, these are not miracles. They are returns to harmony. Liam became the river, wide, moving, without demand, and so the river gave back. Psychological insight. In modern life, especially in later years, we often struggle with the shift from doing to being. We've spent decades casting nets for achievement, love, approval. And when we stop, we feel empty. But stillness is not emptiness. It is the place where we realize we were never missing anything, only running too fast to notice what was already with us. Liam's story reminds us, you don't need to cast another net. You are already on the river. Let it carry you. And what is meant to reach you will. Closing whisper. So tonight, if you are tired of trying, if the world has not given you what you thought it would, if you sit with an empty net and aching hands, rest. Place your nets aside. Float. Let the river be your breath. Let the night carry you without needing.
You do not have to chase peace. You only have to stop chasing, and it will come to sit beside you, like a fish in shallow water, like a gift already waiting on your shore. Story 13. The Whispering Pine of Mount Lu. In the highlands of Mount Lu, where clouds curl through valleys like silk dragons and the air smells of stone and prayer, there stood a single pine tree older than the road beneath it. The monks of the southern province called it Shomatsu, the pine that whispers. It did not sway with the wind like other trees. It creaked slowly, softly, with a sound like breath through hollow bone. And they said, if one sat beneath it for 3 days and 3 nights, without speaking, without sleeping, without seeking, the pine would whisper the answer to your deepest question, but only if the question was truly yours. Many came, most left disappointed. They sat in stillness, only to be met with silence, or worse, with the sound of their own thoughts echoing endlessly in the hush. The pine did not answer curiosity, only sincerity, and sincerity, as the old monk said, cannot be rushed. One day, a young scribe named An appeared at the temple gates. He was not dressed as a pilgrim. His robes were fine, if dusty. He carried a scroll case on his back, and his hands bore ink stains rather than calluses. He bowed before the abbot. I wish to sit beneath the whispering pine. The abbot regarded him. What question brings you? Anne hesitated. My teacher is dying, he said. He told me I must choose, either take his place as royal historian or leave the court and pursue the Dharma. The abbot nodded. And which do you want? Anne lowered his eyes. That is what I do not know. They gave him a plain robe, a bowl of rice, and a single mat, then pointed toward the ridge trail. The path will test your body, the pine will test your heart. It took him a day to climb. By dusk, he arrived at the clearing. The pine stood crooked, wide at the base, its roots gripping the cliff like fingers. Around it, silence, broken only by wind and the occasional sound of crows wheeling far above. He laid out his mat, sat cross-legged, closed his eyes, and waited. The first night, his mind spoke without pause. If I leave the court, I dishonor my master. If I stay, I betray my longing. What would the Buddha have done? What would my father? Am I afraid or just confused? The pine said nothing. On the second day, the ache of sitting grew sharper. His knees throbbed, his back stiffened. Hunger came like a slow fog, but still he sat. He stopped arguing with his thoughts. Let them come, let them go, like birds across the sky. By the second night, the silence deepened. He no longer noticed time, only breath. And then, just before dawn, something changed. Not in the tree, but in him. The question fell away, and in its place, a single sentence rose. What if I chose neither path, but the one that chose me? At that moment, the pine creaked, not like wood shifting, but like something turning inside the earth. A sound that felt old, familiar, like a voice he had heard before birth. And though no words were spoken, he understood. He wept, not from sadness, but from recognition. The tree had not given him an answer. It had reminded him of one he already carried. At sunrise, he stood. He bowed to the pine, then turned toward the valley. When he returned to the temple, the abbot was waiting. "You heard?" he asked. Anne nodded. "I heard nothing," he said, "and everything." The abbot smiled, as it should be. Anne did not return to the court, nor did he take monastic vows. Instead, he wandered, writing only when words came unasked, teaching only when silence failed. He became known as the scribe of the hollow tree, for he carried a piece of fallen pine in his bag, carved into a brush handle. And when asked what wisdom he had found on Mount Lu, he would only say, "I sat long enough for the question to grow quiet, and in that quiet a tree spoke my name." Philosophical reflection. This story is an invitation into deep listening, not to others, but to the quiet voice beneath our seeking.
In Buddhism and Taoist philosophy, truth is not discovered through grasping, but through stillness. The pine tree does not answer in words, because ultimate answers are not linguistic. They are direct experiences, awakenings. The story also challenges the binary mind, this or that. It suggests a third way, the intuitive path, which arises when we stop forcing resolution. The tree whispers only when the heart becomes soft enough to hear what is already known, but forgotten. That is the nature of true insight. It arrives not with thunder, but with familiarity. Psychological insight. Many people, especially beyond midlife, are caught in tension between duty and desire, between identity and calling. The mind demands clarity.
The heart offers only silence, but in that silence is wisdom. Modern psychology speaks of integrative knowing, a type of understanding that arises when logic and emotion are allowed to settle together without pressure. The whispering pine is the symbol of that internal landscape, deep, ancient, waiting. To sit with uncertainty long enough is to allow the answer to arise not from fear, but from wholeness. Closing whisper. So tonight, if you are standing at a crossroads, if your thoughts run in circles, if you long for clarity but fear the silence, sit, close your eyes, let the question soften. You do not have to solve it, you only have to hold it. Like the tree holds wind without needing to chase it. And if you stay long enough, the whisper may come, not as words, but as peace. The peace of a question no longer needing to be answered. Story 14. The Mirror of the Mountain Hermitage. High in the jade-colored peaks of the eastern frontier, where wind moves like prayer and clouds drift low enough to touch, there stood a hermitage no map ever marked. It had no path, no guards, no name. Just a wooden gate carved with a single kanji, Chio, reflection. Travelers who found it never did so by accident. The hermitage revealed itself only to those who had stopped searching for everything else. Within its walls lived only one monk. He was neither old nor young, neither tall nor short. His name had long been shed, like a skin no longer useful. He was known only as the caretaker. His role was simple. He tended to a single object housed in the heart of the hermitage, a mirror, round, silent, unblemished. It stood on a pedestal carved from mountain stone, within a dim chamber lit only by sky-filtered light. They said it had no reflection, but that was not true. It had one, your own, but not as the world saw you, as you truly were. Not your face, your karma. Once every season, a seeker would arrive. They came from cities and villages, temples and markets. Some were priests, some were thieves, some were nobles, some were nothing at all. They came to look into the mirror. They were warned beforehand. You will see what clings. You will see what you've hidden. You will see what wishes to be released. Some entered and screamed. Some wept. Some left laughing. Some could not stay more than a moment, and a rare few bowed in silence. One winter, a woman named Lin approached the hermitage. She had traveled far from the central provinces, where she had once served as a court healer. Her hands had soothed emperors. Her remedies preserved the lives of generals. But in her own home, her son had not survived a fever. Despite every treatment, every chant, every sacred root, he had slipped away in her arms.
That was 3 winters ago. Since then, she had wandered, not to find peace, but to escape blame, her own. She arrived at the hermitage half-starved, clothes torn, face pale as ash. The caretaker gave her tea, warmed her hands, said nothing. When she had recovered enough to speak, she asked, "Is it true? The mirror?" He nodded. "Will I see my sin?" He shrugged. "You will see what is yours." He led her through a narrow corridor into the stone chamber. There stood the mirror. It had no frame, no ornaments, no shine. It was plain, still, softly glowing, though no flame lit the room. He stepped aside. "Alone," he said, "always alone." Lynn stepped forward. Her heart beat against her ribs like a drum in ceremony. She exhaled, closed her eyes, opened them, and looked. At first, she saw only light, then shapes, then herself, but not her face, her sorrow. It moved like mist across the glass. Her failures, her fears, the nights she had stared into the walls with guilt pressing against her lungs. She saw her son's final breath, her own hands shaking. But the mirror did not judge. It held it all, gently, firmly, clearly. Then something shifted. She saw the moment before he died, her eyes full of tears, and his full of love. Not blame, just goodbye. She stepped back. The mirror remained unchanged, but she was not. Outside, the caretaker waited. She bowed low. He asked, "What did you see?" She answered softly, "The part of me that never left him, and the part that has been waiting to return." He offered her a cup of snowmelt. She drank and smiled, the first time in years. She did not return to the court, nor did she become a nun. She found a village by the river and began to care for children again, not to atone, but to love, without needing to save. They say the mirror still waits in the chamber, and the caretaker still tends to it, not polishing, not guarding, just being, like the mirror itself, holding space for those ready to see and to let go. Philosophical reflection. This story reveals the essence of karmic reflection, the ability to see oneself not as ego sees, but as the mind actually moves. The mirror does not create, it reveals. In Buddhist thought, karma is not merely action, but habitual pattern. It's the shape of our clinging, the imprint of our reactions. To see one's karma clearly is the beginning of liberation. But the seeing must be gentle, without defense, without judgment. The mirror offers that, a space to witness the totality of self without distortion. This is vipassana, insight, the moment when sorrow becomes light, not because it vanishes, but because it is finally seen without resistance. And in that seeing, we begin to soften. Psychological insight. Many people carry invisible guilt, especially those in caregiving roles, in positions of responsibility, in families. Guilt often distorts memory, freezes emotion, and prevents grief from completing its path. Lynn's healing did not come from erasing the past. It came from facing it and realizing she was not condemned, only holding on to a story of failure. The mirror gave her permission to feel, without needing to justify. In psychological terms, this is integration, when all parts of the self are welcomed and no part remains exiled in the shadows. That is the real mirror, the one within. Closing whisper. So tonight, if you carry something heavy in your chest, a guilt unspoken, a memory unanswered,
a moment you cannot forget. Imagine the mirror, not cold, not accusing, but clear. It waits, not to show you shame, but to free you from it. You are not your failure. You are the one who stayed, the one who still breathes. And tonight, you are allowed gently inward and finally say, I see. Story 15. The Monk Who Slept with His Shoes On. In the cloud-thick ranges of the far north, where the winters clung longer than the birds could wait, stood a monastery carved into a cliffside. It was a place of long silences, worn prayer beads, and the steady hush of wind against stone. There, among 40 monks of varied ages and tempers, lived a monk known as Shen. He was not remarkable, not the eldest, not the youngest, not the wisest, not the kindest. But he was always ready, always first to rise, last to sleep. The one who kept his robe folded by the door, his pack tucked beneath his bedroll, and, most curious of all, his shoes always on, even in sleep, even in summer, even during zazen, when all were barefoot, Shen sat with his feet bound. No one asked at first, but over time it became a silent question. Why would a monk, sworn to stillness, never let his feet rest? One night during winter retreat, the abbot found Shen in the meditation hall long after the final bell. The coals were low, the wind hissed along the shutters. The abbot sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then, softly, the abbot said, You have not removed your shoes in 10 years. Shen looked down. No, master. Not even in sleep? No. The abbot waited. Why? Shen's hands trembled slightly, then stilled. He spoke quietly, like someone remembering a language he hadn't used in years. When I was a child, our village was raided. He paused. My father told me to sleep with my shoes on. If they come again, he said, run. Don't wait. Don't cry. Just run. Shen swallowed. He did not make it, but I did. The abbot did not respond. He simply bowed his head and left. That spring, Shen was assigned to tend the vegetable garden, a quiet task, away from the halls and bells. At first, he wore his shoes still, but the soil was soft, the earth patient. He found himself kneeling longer, listening to the worms. And one morning, without quite noticing, he removed his sandals. He dug with bare toes, felt the sun touch his heels, and for the first time in decades, his feet breathed. That night, he hesitated before sleep. He looked at his shoes resting beside his mat. He touched the laces, but left them there and lay down, unbound. He did not sleep easily, but when he did, he dreamed of walking barefoot through moss. No danger, no fleeing, only the weight of presence. Over time, the monks noticed. Shen no longer arrived first. Sometimes he paused during work to watch the clouds. Once, a novice fell asleep during chanting, and Shen did not scold. He placed a blanket over the boy's shoulders and returned to his seat. When asked later what had changed, Shen replied, I stopped waiting for danger and started waiting for peace. He never spoke again of the village, never recounted the horror. But when a new monk arrived, one with nervous hands and darting eyes, Shen sat beside him each morning, not speaking, just sitting, shoes off, feet flat to the earth, as if to say, You're safe now, and so am I. Philosophical reflection. This story holds the heart of Buddhist healing, the shift from vigilance to trust. Shen's shoes are not just garments. They are the habits of fear, the rituals of survival long after danger has passed. In Buddhist psychology, we speak of samskaras, the imprints of past suffering that shape current behavior. Shen's shoes are samskaras made visible, a coping mechanism turned lifestyle. The monastery did not strip them from him. It waited, and when he was ready, he removed them himself. This is ahimsa, non-violence, extended toward one's own wounded past. True practice does not demand surrender, it invites it, with time, tenderness, and earth beneath bare feet. Psychological insight. Many who have endured trauma live like Shen, shoes on, ready to run, even in places of safety. Hypervigilance becomes the new normal. But healing is not forcing oneself to feel safe. It is slowly discovering that the body no longer needs to prepare for escape. That peace, once an unfamiliar country, can become home again. And that the old shoes, literal or symbolic, can one day be set aside, not with shame, but with thanks. For they served once, but no longer serve now. So tonight, if part of you is still waiting for the alarm, if your heart sleeps with shoes on, if peace feels unfamiliar, like a language you've forgotten, it's okay. You survived. That was enough. And now, perhaps tonight, you can loosen the laces. Not all the way, just enough. So your feet remember the earth. So your breath remembers the present. So your spirit remembers. You are no longer running. You are home. And the ground beneath you has been waiting. Quietly, all along. Story 16. The Voice That Wasn't Mine. In a quiet valley wrapped between cedar hills and curling rivers, there stood a monastery where silence was the first teacher and the last refuge. Its monks rarely spoke. When they did, it was in poems or questions with no answers. And yet, for all its hush, the place was full of sound. Wind against wood, brush against scroll, the subtle echo of footsteps across smooth stone. And one man, Taman, carried a sound inside him that would not stop. It was a voice, not his own. He was a good monk, precise with his bowing, generous with his work, steady in posture and punctual with every bell. But inside, each moment brought commentary. You should be better. That was too slow. They're watching. Don't embarrass yourself. The voice was not loud, but constant, like the murmur of a stream beneath stone. It had the tone of an elder, male, measured, disappointed. It had followed him since childhood. He told no one. He believed it was simply his mind. Until one evening, after the final meditation, he lingered in the main hall. The incense had burned low. The moon cast long shadows across the rice paper walls. The old calligraphy master, Brother N, sat nearby, cleaning his brush. Taman bowed. But before he could leave, N spoke. "Your silence is very noisy, Taman." Taman froze. He said nothing. N looked up. "Whose voice is in your ear?" Taman's lips parted, then closed. Finally, he whispered, "My father's." N nodded. "Ah, mine came from my teacher. Took me 20 years to realize it wasn't mine." Taman looked up, startled. "It isn't?" N smiled gently. Voices that judge without kindness never belong to the soul. They are echoes, leftovers. Then what do I do? Sit longer, N said, until your own voice speaks. The next morning, Taman did not join the others. He walked to the cedar grove above the monastery, where a bench sat beneath a weathered statue of Jizo. He sat and listened. The first hour, the voice scolded. "You're wasting time. You should be working. Lazy." But he did not argue. He simply noted, "That is not me. That is not me. That is not me." The second hour, memories came. A broken teacup, a slanted line in a childhood scroll, a father's sigh. Still, Taman breathed, felt the sun on his skin, listened to the wind. By late afternoon, the voice quieted. In its place, space. Not peace exactly, but room. He sat every day after that, sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer. The voice returned, but softer. He began to recognize when it was speaking, when it wasn't. And then, one afternoon, as he poured tea alone in his quarters, a new voice came, gentle, unfamiliar, but deeply still. It said simply, "You do not need to be punished to be good." Taman stopped, set the cup down, and cried. After that, the voice of judgment did not vanish, but it no longer ruled. And beneath it, a quieter voice began to rise, his own, not perfect, but whole. Years later, when Taman became a teacher, he said little in his talks. But when a young monk struggled with self-doubt, Taman would sit beside him and ask, "Whose voice is that?" And then, wait. Philosophical reflection. In Buddhist practice, the mind is both the field and the farmer. Much of what we suffer is not from life itself, but from the narratives we inherited, voices of past pain, fear, expectation. These voices become part of our internal weather. But in meditation, especially in deep silence, we begin to distinguish the conditioned voice from the original mind. The voice that critiques, rushes, demands, it is not you. It is a recording, and recordings can be played or turned off. The true self does not speak in criticism. It speaks in clarity. In the absence of harshness, the Dharma reveals itself. Psychological insight. Many people, especially after midlife, discover that much of their inner dialogue is not their own. It comes from parents, teachers, culture, well-meaning or otherwise. Psychology calls this introjection, the internalization of others' voices as if they were yours. Healing begins when we differentiate, when we ask, "Who taught me to speak to myself this way?" Taman's journey is one of reclaiming the self from inherited noise. Silence is not emptiness. It is the place where you can hear your true name again and speak to yourself like someone worth listening to. Closing whisper. So, tonight, if you hear a voice inside that is unkind, that urges, rushes, scolds, if it interrupts your peace, even in stillness, pause, ask it, "Whose voice are you?" And then, wait. You do not need to fight it. Just stop obeying it. Let your own voice come forth, the one that knows how to rest, how to breathe, how to begin again without punishment. It's there, beneath the noise, waiting for you to listen back. Story 17. The Bamboo That Never Broke. In a forgotten valley where the mist moved like breath between the hills, there stood a village surrounded by forests so old they had no name. The people there were quiet. They planted rice in spring, gathered firewood in autumn, and whispered their prayers into the wind without expecting replies. But one year, the storms came early and stayed. Rain fell for 40 nights. Hills slid. Paths disappeared. The river climbed into homes and swept away fences, animals, and hope. When the storm passed, a silence heavier than grief lingered. And among the ruined fields, a boy named Kaoru stood barefoot in the mud, staring at what used to be his home. He was 13 and alone. The elders took him in, fed him rice, let him sleep near the hearth. But he did not speak for days. When he finally did, his voice was distant, like someone talking from inside a dream. He asked one question: why did the river take everything except the bamboo? No one answered, except the blind monk. The blind monk had come to the village 20 years ago and stayed without explanation. He lived in a hut near the waterfall, weaving baskets and teaching the children how to sit still. He had no name anyone knew. They called him the listener. One morning, Kaoru climbed to the monk's hut. The door was open. The monk sat cross-legged by the stream, a small bamboo flute resting on his lap. "You came," the monk said without turning. "How did you know?" "I hear your question." Kaoru sat beside him. "I watched the trees fall. I watched roofs collapse. But the bamboo grove didn't break, not one stalk." The monk nodded. Kaoru asked, "Why?" The monk said, "You are not asking about bamboo." The next day, Kaoru returned. So did the next. Each time, the monk offered no answer, only questions. What do you resist that you could bend toward? What part of you wants to fall to be seen? Which storm are you still fighting? Kaoru grew frustrated. "I want to be strong, like the bamboo." The monk touched the flute. "Then you must stop trying to be the mountain." One afternoon, the monk led Kaoru into the grove. "Close your eyes," he said. Kaoru obeyed. "Now walk." "But I'll fall." "Fall, then rise. The bamboo does it all the time." Kaoru took a hesitant step, then another. Soon he could feel the soft earth, the sway of thin stalks brushing his skin. It felt like walking through breath. He smiled. That night, he dreamed he was a single bamboo shoot rising through wet soil. No one cheered, no one noticed, but he rose anyway. Over the weeks, the boy changed. He laughed again. He helped rebuild homes one nail at a time. He sat with the old widow who had lost both sons and said nothing, just shared her silence. One day, he returned to the grove alone and whispered, "I understand now." The wind did not answer, but the stalks leaned toward him, as if in quiet approval. Years passed. Kaoru grew into a young man. He never left the valley. He became the quiet one others sought for advice when things broke, when hearts failed, when storms returned. He still visited the monk, though the old man now barely spoke. On the monk's final day, Kaoru sat beside him. The monk smiled faintly and asked, "What is the strongest thing you know?" Kaoru answered without hesitation, "The thing that does not need to be." The monk exhaled once and was gone. At his funeral, Kaoru did not cry. He took the old bamboo flute and placed it in the monk's hands. Then turned to the villagers and said, "When storms come again, and they will, do not be the wall. Be the stalk." Philosophical reflection. This tale invites us to examine the illusion of strength. We are often taught to be firm, immovable, like stone. But in Buddhist thought, True resilience is not rigidity, but adaptability. Just as bamboo bends with the wind and survives what oaks cannot, we too must learn to yield. Yielding is not weakness, it is wisdom, the knowing of when to stand and when to flow. Kauru's transformation is not dramatic, it is quiet. Like all true growth, he does not conquer grief, he becomes empty enough to let it pass through. Psychological insight. Many people mistake healing for triumph. They believe to heal is to be unshaken, untouched. But in psychology, we know the most resilient minds are not those who never break, but those who bend without snapping. Kauru's attachment to control, his desire to be strong, mirrors the modern craving for perfection, success, and clarity. But the storm does not ask if we're ready. It simply comes. Healing is learning to stand again, not because we defeated the storm, but because we allowed it to pass through us without turning us to stone. So tonight, if life has bent you low, if the storm has taken what you loved, if your soul feels soft, wet, unrecognizable, you are not broken. You are bamboo. The world needs fewer monuments and more stalks that sing with the wind. Do not resist your swaying. Let it move you. And when the wind is gone, you will still be here, rooted, whole, alive. Story 18. The Dust That Remained. In the southern reaches of the Old Kingdom, beyond the dunes where the sun bleached even time itself, there stood a monastery carved from stone and silence. It was not built to last, and yet it did. Each season, wind ground its walls into softer curves. Each year, one monk would leave, and no new one would come. They never asked why. The abbot, an old man with trembling hands and a smile shaped like dusk, often said, "We are not here to preserve, we are here to remember." When Ansu arrived at the monastery, he was not seeking truth. He was fleeing death. His mother had passed only a week before, swiftly, without farewell, and grief clung to him like the desert heat. She had been everything, stern, devout, lonely, a woman of few affections and many rules. He had not cried, not yet, but the silence in her old house had grown louder than any scream. So he packed one robe, 2 scrolls, and walked into the desert until he arrived at the gate of stone monks. The monastery welcomed him without question. They gave him a cell the size of a blanket, a bowl, and 3 instructions. Sweep the inner courtyard each morning, sit in stillness each dusk, leave nothing behind. Ansu followed all 3. But each night, as he lay beneath the cracked ceiling, his mind swirled with her voice. "You're too slow. Don't forget the rules. You never listen." It was strange how the dead grew louder after they left. Weeks passed. Ansu swept the courtyard daily, collecting dust in neat circles. But each morning, it returned. The wind delivered it back, as if whispering, "Try again." He began to resent the dust. He swept harder, faster. So mornings he wept. Still the dust came. Still he swept. One evening, during the dusk meditation, the abbot approached. He knelt beside Ansu and said softly, "Do you know why we sweep each day?" "To clear the dust." "No," the abbot said, "to see it." Ansu looked confused. The abbot smiled. "Some things never go. Grief is one. Regret is another. Dust is both teacher and mirror. But what's the point if it returns? The abbot's gaze drifted toward the sky, now tinged gold with coming night. Because you return, he said, and one day you won't. Then he rose and walked away. That night, Ansu dreamed of his mother, but she was not scolding him, she was sweeping. Each motion slow, careful, as if the ground deserved her reverence. He woke with tears already drying on his cheeks. From then on, he swept differently, not to remove, but to see, to remember, to greet the dust, not as enemy, but as part of the monastery, part of the desert, part of himself. Each sweep was an apology, each swirl a word unsaid, each return of the dust a reminder that grief too was sacred. On the 40th day, a monk left the monastery. He did not speak his reasons. No one did. Ansu was asked to clean the monk's room. He found a folded robe, a cracked bowl, and a handful of desert sand placed carefully on the sleeping mat. There was a note. Only those who vanish completely forget who they are. He didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But he held the bowl close to his chest for a long while before returning it to the kitchen. Years passed. Ansu stayed. He took no vows. He offered no teachings. But people who visited the monastery remembered him, the young man who swept with the patience of stone. Some said he never smiled. Others said he smiled with his eyes only. A few swore that when he swept, the wind paused, and the dust moved by its own will. When the abbot died, there was no ceremony, only a bowl of water placed on the altar until it evaporated. Ansu said nothing. He simply picked up the abbot's broom and swept. Philosophical reflection. This story speaks to the nature of impermanence, one of the central truths of Buddhist wisdom. In the West, we often seek to resolve or remove grief, to sweep it away, clean the soul. But the Dharma suggests something else. Not the erasure of sorrow, but the companionship with it. We sweep not to eliminate the dust, but to see what remains when the sweeping is done. To become intimate with our impermanence is not to despair. It is to live fully aware, tenderly engaged, and less grasping. The dust returns, and so do we, until we don't. Psychological insight. Modern psychology often tries to help us move on. But trauma, grief, and complex emotions don't disappear neatly. They return, like dust, like memory. What changes is how we relate to their return. Ansu's early sweeping is an attempt at control, at perfection. But healing begins when he learns to honor the return, to allow the presence of sorrow without collapse. This mirrors mindfulness-based therapy. Observe, name, allow. The lesson: your pain may revisit you, but you are not broken. You are sweeping. And in sweeping, you remember who you are beneath the dust. Closing whisper. Tonight, if the dust of old sorrows has settled on your chest, don't rush to brush it off. Sit with it. Let it speak. Let it say what could not be said. And when you rise, sweep gently, not to forget, but to remember that even dust was once a star, was once breath, was once part of something beloved. So are you, still here, still sweeping, still sacred. Story 19. The Thread Beneath the Gate. Long ago, hidden deep within the folds of mist and pine trees, There was a wooden temple with no name. It had no door, no guards, and no records. Only a simple inscription carved into the arch of its entrance. Only the uninvited may stay. Travelers passed by without noticing. Those who noticed rarely entered, and those who entered seldom spoke of it again. It was said that the monks who lived there wove nothing but silence, spun from memory, loss, and the soft threads of repentance. On the first day of winter, a man named Riku appeared at the gate. He was in his 60s, tall but bent. He carried no belongings, just a single strand of faded red silk wrapped around his left wrist. The gate creaked open without being touched. No one greeted him. Still, he stepped inside. The monks gave him no questions, only a blanket, a bowl, a broom, and silence. Riku did not speak for days, but each morning before the fog lifted, he sat before the gate, just inside, and stared at the forest path, waiting. For what? Only he knew. One evening, a younger monk approached him. The boy was no more than 20, gentle-eyed, quiet-handed. He bowed. "Elder, may I ask?" Riku turned. The monk continued, "Why do you always wait at the gate?" Riku smiled, but the smile was torn. "For someone I once turned away." The monk sat beside him. Riku unwrapped the red silk and placed it on the ground between them. "It belonged to my son." Decades ago, Riku had been a wealthy merchant in the capital, respected, feared, obeyed. He had a son, gentle, artistic, slow to speak. The boy carved birds from driftwood, read poetry to lanterns, and wept when plum trees bloomed too early. Riku called him weak. One day, the boy left without goodbye, leaving behind only a piece of red silk tied to the garden gate. Riku never searched. He told himself the boy would return, but the boy did not. Years passed. The business collapsed. The wife withered, and Riku grew old in a house filled with too many walls. One autumn night, he dreamt of his son standing at a temple gate, silently waiting, wrist bare. When he woke, the red silk was still tied to the garden gate. So he followed the dream, until it led him to this temple. "I sit here," Riku whispered, "because I once closed the gate." The young monk nodded, then asked softly, "Do you believe he forgives you?" Riku did not answer, but his shoulders lowered for the first time. Winter thickened, snow veiled the trees, and still Riku sat at the gate. But now he began leaving threads of red silk on the step each morning, just a few inches, cut from his wrist wrap. He said nothing of it. The monks said nothing either, but each thread remained undisturbed, as if the wind, too, respected them. One night, as the fire crackled low and the stars watched without blinking, the young monk approached again. "Elder," he said, "would you like to offer the evening chant?" Riku looked surprised. "I have no voice for chants." The monk bowed. "Then offer silence. It holds more truth than song." So Riku sat with the monks, and in the stillness he imagined the sound of his son's breathing, once small, then slow, then gone. He wept, not loudly, but honestly. That night he slept without dreams. The next morning, the monks found him seated at the gate, upright, eyes closed. He was no longer breathing, but his face held peace. His wrist was bare, and at his feet lay the final piece of silk, carefully folded. Underneath it, etched into the frost-covered stone, was a message in faint brushstrokes. Forgiveness doesn't knock, it waits, but the gate must open. The monks did not burn his body. Instead, they wrapped it in the silk and buried it beneath the plum tree behind the temple. And each spring, when the blossoms opened too early, the petals fell in silence, like a son returning home. Philosophical reflection. This story explores the karma of unspoken remorse and the healing that arises not from answers but from quiet offerings of presence. In Buddhist thought, forgiveness is not granted, it is remembered, when the heart becomes light enough to let go of blame, even across lifetimes. Riku never received a spoken pardon, but in his waiting, in his surrender, he became worthy of one. He did not return to ask for anything. He returned to open the gate he once closed, symbolically, ritually, spiritually. And that was enough. Psychological insight. Many elder adults carry the invisible weight of past severances, children they misunderstood, partners they hurt, friends they left behind. Western psychology calls this unfinished grief. Yet healing is still possible. Riku's thread of silk represents a concept in trauma work known as repair attempts. Even when the other person is absent or gone, we can still create healing internally by making symbolic gestures of amends. What matters is intention, witness, and ritual. If tonight you carry the ache of something left unsaid, or someone you never had the chance to say, "I'm sorry" to, sit quietly. Light no incense. Say no words. Just place a thread, real or imagined, at the threshold of your heart. Then let the gate open. Not for them to return, but for you to walk through and rest. Story 20. The Rain That Knew My Name. In a forgotten province beyond the Fourth River, where paths turned to mist before your feet could follow, there was a hut that did not appear on any map. It was not hidden, it simply refused to be found by those who sought it. Yet on the third night of the 12th rain, a boy arrived. His name was Jin. He had not eaten in 3 days. His eyes were red not from the wind, but from a memory he could not shake. When he collapsed on the moss-covered step, the old man who lived inside the hut opened the door, as if he'd been expecting him. He asked only one question. "Are you running from the storm or from yourself?" Jin answered by fainting. When he awoke, there was rice beside him and tea so bitter it pulled the tears from his throat. The old man sat cross-legged across the fire, stoking it with quiet intention. "Eat," he said. Jin obeyed. But when the bowl was empty, he bowed deeply and said, "I will leave in the morning. I've already caused too much trouble." The old man smiled. Trouble doesn't knock, it arrives, and then it teaches. Jin stayed, not because he wanted to, but because the rains refused to end. They beat on the roof each night like a second heart. He swept the floor, chopped root vegetables, washed bowls with river water. But he never spoke of why he had come. Until one morning, after the 7th rain, he found the old man outside, sitting motionless as water poured down his shoulders. "You'll catch fever," Jin said. The old man opened his eyes slowly. "This rain knows me." Jin tilted his head. "What does that mean?" The old man reached out, caught a single drop on his finger, and whispered, "It remembers." That night by the fire, Jin finally told the truth. He had been a novice monk at a distant temple, obedient, silent, loved by the abbot. But one day, out of jealousy or pride, he struck another student during a heated argument, an act that drew blood. No punishment came, only silence. The abbot said softly, "You must choose if this temple will remain your refuge or your prison." Jin could not bear the weight of his own shame, so he fled and wandered for weeks, chased not by others, but by the echo of his own hand. "I thought if I left, I could leave behind who I was." The old man nodded. "Then you understand the first illusion." "What illusion?" "That we can outrun what lives inside us." Jin asked, "So what now?" The old man stood and walked to the doorway. The rain was still falling, softer now, like lullabies on leaves. He held out both hands, palms up. "Let it fall on you," he said. Jin stepped forward. The cold rain struck his skin, sent shivers through his spine, soaked the robe he had tried to keep clean. But he did not flinch. It felt like being seen, and not being blamed. After a long silence, the old man whispered, "This rain has fallen on criminals and kings, on widows and warriors, on children and corpses. It does not judge. It only remembers how to fall." For the next 3 days, Jin sat outside during each storm. He did not ask for answers. He listened. He wept. He let the water erase no wounds, but trace their shape. On the 10th morning, the sun appeared, timid, like a monk unsure of his place. The hut looked smaller in the light. The old man handed Jin a walking stick, carved from pine, worn smooth by decades of hands. "Go," he said. Jin hesitated. "Go where?" The old man shrugged. "Where your shame has not yet learned how to follow you." "Will it ever leave?" "No, but it will walk behind you, not ahead." As Jin bowed in gratitude, the old man added, "If you meet another young man running from himself, don't give him advice." Jin smiled. "What should I give him?" The old man looked up at the sky. "A place to sit in the rain." Philosophical reflection. This story touches on a truth known in both Buddhist and Stoic thought. You cannot purify yourself by fleeing your mistakes. Guilt, when met with stillness, becomes humility. But when resisted, it becomes a ghost that whispers louder than any voice. The rain here is not metaphor, it is a teacher. It reminds us that life continues, that the world does not demand perfection, only presence. You don't heal by pretending nothing happened. You heal by learning to sit beneath the sky that saw it all and did not turn away. Psychological insight. Many adults, especially those in midlife, carry unprocessed guilt from moments that shaped their identity. Therapy speaks of integration, not erasure. What Jin experiences is a form of exposure and reparenting. Facing what happened, being held in non-judgmental space, learning to tolerate the discomfort of being seen. This is what trauma needs, not solutions, but witnessing. Closing whisper. If tonight you carry something you've not yet forgiven yourself for, step outside your thoughts, sit by the window, and listen. Even if it's not raining where you are, imagine the sound of something older than judgment, softer than blame. Let it fall over you, not to cleanse, but to remember. You are still here, and the sky still knows your name. Story 21. The Lamp That Waited Too Long. The old woman lived at the edge of the forest, in a thatched roof hut with a crooked chimney and a wooden floor that creaked even when no one walked across it. She was not a nun, she was not a healer, she did not chant. But the villagers called her the Lamp Mother, because every night, Long after the rice fields had turned silver under the moon, she would light a small clay lamp and place it outside her door, facing the path that led to the village, and she would wait, not for a visitor, but for a feeling that never came. Her name was Tama. She had lived many lives in one body, as a daughter, a wife, a mother, and now a shadow of all those roles. Her son, Ren, had not visited in 19 years, not since the day they quarreled under the plum tree, words sharp as shattered bowls. She had told him he was ungrateful. He had told her she was controlling. The silence that followed grew so thick, even the seasons seemed to tiptoe past their door. The village whispered many things. That boy became a monk, you know. He built a temple far in the northern mountains. Maybe he's ashamed. Maybe he's dead. But Tama never asked for confirmation. She only lit her lamp, night after night, year after year. The oil grew darker, her eyes grew dimmer, but the flame still danced, even when her hands trembled. One spring evening, a young novice from the mountain temple arrived in the village. He was polite, shaved-headed, carried an alms bowl with both hands. When he asked for shelter, the villagers pointed to Tama's hut. "Try there. She feeds the ghosts." When the novice knocked, Tama opened the door, holding the lamp as if it were part of her body. She looked at the boy's robe, his bowl, his silence, and she stepped aside. That night, they ate in near silence. But before sleeping, the novice asked, "Do you know of a monk named Ren?" The question floated in the room like incense that had forgotten to rise. Tama's lips quivered. Her fingers gripped the lamp tighter. "I once knew a boy with that name," she said. The novice nodded. "He is my teacher." Silence again. But this one was different. It had warmth. Before dawn, Tama asked the novice to stay one more night. Just one. He agreed. The next morning, she swept the yard, lit the stove, boiled herbs, washed her hair, everything she hadn't done in years. The novice said nothing, but he watched her as one watches falling petals, with reverence and a hint of grief. That night, Tama lit the lamp, but instead of placing it outside, she set it between them. She spoke of her son, how he once sang to cicadas, how he hated mushrooms, how he cried when the ox got sick, and how she failed to say she was sorry. The novice listened, truly listened, and when she was done, he bowed low and whispered, "He sings to the cicadas still." Tama smiled, and then she did something she had not done in 19 years. She blew out the lamp, not in anger, but in peace. The next morning, the novice was gone, but by the door, wrapped in a piece of old orange cloth, was a letter, in handwriting she knew by heart. "Mother, I left because I was scared you were right. I stayed away because I was afraid I was wrong. Forgiveness came long ago. I just didn't know how to offer it. If the lamp still burns, I will return. If not, I will carry its light within me. Your son, Ren." Tama pressed the letter to her chest, then walked to the door, and for the first time in 19 years, she did not light the lamp. She did not need to. She was already home. Philosophical reflection. In Buddhist teaching, holding on, even to love, becomes suffering when it is clung to. Tama's lamp was not wrong, but it was incomplete. She mistook waiting for love and punishment for memory. True connection, however, does not rely on visible return. It lives in the willingness to release the flame, trusting it has already illuminated what needed to be seen. Psychological insight. Older adults often carry unresolved emotional ruptures with children, made heavier by the years and absence of closure. Tama's transformation reflects the shift from external hope to internal reconciliation. The act of listening to her own story aloud, witnessed by someone kind, allowed integration of regret into softness, not bitterness. The extinguishing of the lamp was not an ending, but a completion. If you too have waited too long, not for someone's return, but for your own permission to stop waiting, tonight may you find the courage to light a different flame. One that glows quietly within, not as hope for someone else to arrive, but as a reminder. You are allowed to stop waiting and still be worthy of love. Story 22. The Well Beneath the Argument. In a quiet village nested between two ridgelines, there stood an old, dry well. It hadn't drawn water in decades. The stones around it were cracked, its rope long gone. And yet the villagers never dared to cover it. They said the well remembered. Remembered what? They never answered. But if you listened closely at dusk, when the air grew still and the birds held their breath, you might hear a murmur, not from the wind, but from something older. Long ago, the land around the well belonged to two families, that of Yoru, the carpenter, and Tetsu, the blacksmith. They had been friends since boyhood. They built each other's homes, celebrated each other's children, shared meals and memories beneath the same plum tree. But time, as it always does, tested their roots. One winter, after a heavy rain, the boundary stones that marked their land shifted. By mere feet. But those feet carried centuries of meaning. The rice paddies along the slope became disputed. Yoru claimed the flood pushed the stones onto his land. Tetsu insisted it was theft disguised by weather. They argued, at first with words, then with silence, then with court petitions and fists and lines drawn not in ink, but in bitterness. The village tried to mediate, but pride spoke louder than truth, and neither man stepped near the old well again. 10 years passed. Neither Yoru nor Tetsu smiled as they once had. The plum tree grew wild, no longer pruned by their shared hands. Children avoided both homes, afraid of the scowl that hung like fog around them. And still, the land lay fallow, untouched, as if it mourned its own name. One evening, a monk arrived. He did not wear orange robes. His garments were brown, patched, and faded by rain. He asked no questions, offered no teachings. He simply sat by the old well, every day, from dawn until dusk, for 7 days. He neither begged nor preached. He only watched the stones and listened. On the 8th morning, Tetsu approached him. "What do you wait for?" he asked. The monk replied, "I'm waiting to see if the well still weeps." Tetsu scoffed. "It's dry." "Is it?" the monk smiled. "Or is it just silent?" The next day, Yoru came. He too had questions, but asked none. He stood beside the monk, arms crossed. For a while, they said nothing. Then Yoru mumbled, "That well saw everything." The monk nodded. "It remembers." By the 9th day, both men sat beside the monk, not together, but not apart. On the 10th day, the monk placed a small stone bowl between them. "If you wish," he said, "each of you may pour one truth into the well. Not to each other, not to the village, just to the well." Yoru frowned. "What will that do?" The monk smiled. "It may show you which thirst you're still trying to quench." Tetsu went first. He stepped to the edge of the well, knelt, and whispered, "I feared losing what my father gave me. I feared being seen as weak. I feared Yoru no longer respected me." Then Yoru came. He placed both hands on the stone rim and said, "I feared growing old alone. I feared not being remembered. I feared my worth ending with my property." The well, as always, said nothing, but the silence felt softer. The monk bowed. 2 cups of truth offered. The well has drunk well tonight. He stood and left without another word. The villagers watched him disappear over the ridge, never learning his name. In the days that followed, Tetsu began repairing the plum tree's broken limbs. Yoru swept the path that had long gathered moss. They did not apologize. They did not sign papers. But one morning, they both stood beside the old well and nodded. It was enough. Later that year, they planted rice together, not on his land or his, but in the space between. The villagers no longer feared walking past the well. Children played near it again, tossing petals and pebbles inside, waiting to hear a splash that never came. But sometimes, just sometimes, they swore they heard something deeper than water, a sigh, a whisper, a thank you. Philosophical reflection. Conflict is rarely about the surface issue. 2 feet of land, a boundary stone? No. The deeper cause is fear of loss, of honor, belonging, or meaning. Like the dry well, people appear empty when what they once held has long evaporated. But when truth is poured in, not accusation, not performance, something shifts. Not the facts, but the thirst. Psychological insight. Prolonged conflict, especially over family land or legacy, often masks deep emotional insecurity, abandonment fears, unresolved parental expectations, fragile ego boundaries. Both Yoru and Tetsu projected their inner losses onto external claims. The monk served as a non-judgmental container, a therapist in the form of a presence, not a fixer. Healing did not come through debate, but witnessing. Sometimes, to end a feud, we must first hear our own buried truths. If you carry a bitterness long buried, with a sibling, a parent, a friend, ask yourself, what am I protecting? What am I afraid will die if I forgive? And then sit. Not to fix, but to listen. To the well inside you. It may be dry now, but somewhere beneath the silence, it remembers the sound of water, and it waits. Story 23. The Man Who Buried His Voice. In the far hills of the eastern province, where the fog curled like old paper and crows called louder than wind, there lived a man known only as Shino. He was a potter. His hands shaped clay into bowls so light they hummed when tapped. But no one ever heard him speak, not once. Not even when selling his wares in the village market. Not even when thanked. He only bowed and walked away. Some said he was mute by birth. Others believed he had taken a vow of silence. But the old women whispered something else. That man once swallowed his voice. And the well near his kiln, they said, was not for water. It was for words. Decades earlier, Shino had been a child with a voice like rain, soft, constant, unnoticed by some, but deeply heard by those who knew how to listen. He sang to insects, he talked to stones, he told stories to birds. But his father, a soldier turned farmer, did not find this charming. Men do not babble, he said. Men do. Men endure. So when Shino cried after his mother died, his father struck him. When you ache, dig. When you miss, work. So Shino dug. First soil, then silence. One evening, after another scolding, the boy wandered deep into the hills. He found a clearing where the moonlight fell like milk on the moss, and there, with trembling hands, he dug a small hole. Into it he whispered, "I'm not weak. I just feel too much." He covered the hole with earth, marked it with a stone, and went home, quieter. The next time his heart hurt, he returned, dug again, whispered again. Why couldn't she stay? I hate that I hate him. I'm still just a boy. And again he buried the words, year after year, until there were dozens of little mounds, each holding a part of him. And finally, one night, when his father died without a goodbye, Shino buried the last of his voice. He whispered into the soil, I forgive you, but I cannot carry you. Then he sealed his mouth with silence. But silence is not absence. It is presence too loud to name. The villagers never knew why Shino's pottery shimmered like grief made visible, why his bowls felt like vessels for unspoken prayers. But they bought them, placed them on altars, filled them with tea and tears. And still, Shino said nothing. One spring, a young woman came to the village. She was a traveler, a flute maker by trade. She spoke little, but watched much. One morning, she visited Shino's stall. She picked up a bowl, tapped it, listened, then said, "This one is singing." Shino looked at her. The first time in years someone had used that word. She returned the next day, and the next, not to speak, but to sit. She did not ask him to talk. Only once, after a long silence, did she say, "When I was a girl, I buried my drawings." He looked at her, eyes widened slightly. She smiled. "Maybe one day we'll dig together." The next morning, she found a note tucked into her satchel, handwritten, faint, but unmistakably his. There is a forest where the earth holds many voices. Some are mine, some are still waiting. She followed the path he left her, and found the mounds, dozens of them, each marked by a small shard of pottery. She sat among them. She did not dig. She simply played her flute, and the forest listened. Later that year, the villagers noticed something strange. Shino began humming as he worked, low, like wind in a jar. Then, one day, he said a word, not loudly, not to anyone, just to the clay. But it was enough. The earth had returned his voice, not as speech, but as song. Philosophical reflection. In the Buddhist view, when we repress our pain, we do not destroy it. We simply plant it in the soil of our being. It grows roots. It bears fruit in ways we do not expect. In silence, in stiffness, in disconnection. But when we bear witness to our own buried parts, without judgment, healing begins. Not as a sudden waterfall, but as dew returning to dry leaves. Psychological insight. Many adults carry childhood wounds that were never validated. The inner child, unheard, unseen, may lead to lifelong emotional suppression, especially in men trained to equate silence with strength. Shino's journey is not about finding his voice in speech, but in expression. Through clay, through presence, through being gently witnessed by someone who does not demand transformation, only truth. If you too have buried pieces of your voice, not just words, but feelings never spoken, know this: they are not lost, only waiting. And perhaps, like Shino, you don't need to speak to heal, only to listen to the forest inside you, where something tender still hums beneath the silence. Story 24. The Daughter Who Carried Stones. In a village cupped by mountains like hands in prayer, there was a girl named Naoko. She was known for her strength, not the kind measured in arms or legs, but in how much she could carry. On her back, she bore baskets of firewood heavier than most men. On her shoulders, she hauled water from the farthest stream. On her head, she balanced baskets of rice, clay pots, sacks of grain. But no one ever asked why she carried so much, and she never said. Her mother had died young. Her father, a stonecutter, raised her with silence and sharp eyes. He taught her to split rock, to move boulders, to carry what needed carrying. But he never taught her how to rest. If it hurts, he said once, it means you're still alive. She believed him, so she never complained, even when her bones ached, even when her hands cracked in the winter, even when her heart sagged under weight she could not name. When she turned 20, Naoko left the village. No one stopped her. She walked with nothing but a walking stick and a small cloth pouch. But even then, her back was bent, not from age, but from a weight she'd never put down. She wandered for weeks, following no road in particular, until she came to a quiet valley, where a single temple bell echoed through the trees. There she met an old nun named Seiko. Seiko said nothing at first. She only looked at Naoko and said, "You're still carrying them." Naoko blinked. Carrying what? The nun pointed, not at her hands, but at her back. The stones. At first, Naoko thought the old woman was mad. But that night, she dreamt of herself walking barefoot along a mountain trail. Behind her trailed dozens of small stones tied with threads around her waist. Each stone bore a name. His anger, her sadness, their silence, my shame. She woke in tears. For the first time, her back hurt in a different way, not from strain, but from recognition. Seiko let her stay. Each morning, they swept the temple yard in silence. Each evening, they brewed tea and watched the mist roll down the hills. One day, Seiko handed her a basket of river stones. "Take them to the top of the ridge," she said. Naoko obeyed. It was a steep path. Her legs burned, her breath quickened, but she made it. When she returned, Seiko handed her more stones. The next day, again and again, until the fifth day when Naoko collapsed halfway. "I can't," she gasped. Seiko only nodded. "That," she said, "is the first true thing you've said since you arrived." Later, as Naoko sat by the fire, she whispered, "My father never said he loved me." Seiko said nothing, just added a log to the fire. Naoko continued, "He only told me to endure, to carry, to be strong." Another log. The fire hissed. "I thought if I carried everything, I'd be loved, or at least not left behind." Seiko looked at her. "Did it work?" Naoko shook her head. "No, I only forgot how to feel anything." The next morning, Seiko gave her a single stone, larger than the others, smooth, black, cold. "Take this one," she said, "but don't climb." "Then what?" "Walk with it. Listen to it. Sleep beside it. Speak to it." Naoko frowned, but obeyed. She carried the stone for 7 days. At night, she placed it beside her mat. During the day, she held it in her lap. Sometimes she cursed it. Sometimes she wept. Sometimes she sang to it, old lullabies from her mother's voice. By the end of the 7th day, the stone felt lighter, not physically, but as if it had heard her, and sighed. On the 8th day, Seiko said, "Now return it to the river." Naoko walked in silence to the stream. She knelt, placed the stone gently in the water, and whispered, "You are not mine to carry any more." She watched the current embrace it. Then, for the first time since childhood, she stood without pain. She returned to the temple, smiling, but Seiko was not there. Only a note. "This temple is not built of wood or bells. It is built of letting go. You don't need to stay. You only need to remember." Naoko bowed deeply and began her journey home. When she arrived at her village, people stared, not because of her face, but her posture. She stood tall, unburdened. She visited her father's grave, placed a single white stone, and whispered, "I understand, and I release you." Then she sat beneath the tree where her mother used to hum, and for the first time in her life, she rested without guilt. Philosophical reflection. In the teachings of Zen, what we carry unconsciously becomes our identity. The burden is not always external, but ancestral, emotional, unspoken. Children of harsh parents often become strong, not by choice, but by necessity. And in that survival, they forget softness. Forget how to ask for help. Forget they are allowed to stop. Nyoka's story reminds us, strength is not in holding, it is in knowing when to put something down. Psychological insight. This story mirrors the experience of intergenerational trauma, where one carries emotional burdens from their caregivers without realizing it. Often, adult children continue to act from a place of fear, guilt, or unworthiness rooted in childhood. But healing begins when we identify the stones we carry and name them. Therapeutic practices such as journaling, parts work, or simply being witnessed in safe company can unlock the first steps to releasing these weights. What stones do you still carry? Whose voices live in your spine? And if you put them down, gently, one by one, what might rise in their place? A breath, a song, a self that remembers how to rest. Story 25. The Old Monk and the Pebble Garden. At the edge of the northern mountains, where snow fell even in spring and the wind sounded like distant chanting, there was a monastery with no name, no gates, no statues, no bells, only a winding path of flat stones and a garden filled with thousands of smooth pebbles. In that monastery lived a monk named Ian, whose name meant eternity. But he was very old, and he knew nothing was eternal. Not even names, not even him. Ian was not famous. He had no disciples, no scriptures written in his hand. He rarely spoke and never gave sermons. His only task each day was tending the pebble garden. Each morning, he would walk slowly, pick up a single stone, wash it in silence, and place it carefully in a new spot, just the few inches from where it was the day before. No one understood why, and no one asked, because those who visited the monastery, wanderers, seekers, those tired of loud teachings, came not for answers, they came for his silence.
a silence that healed, not like medicine, but like sleep. One spring morning, a young man named Kaoru arrived. He had wandered far, his eyes hollow with grief. He had lost his wife that winter in a river accident. He had tried temples, teachers, chants. Nothing softened the ache. Until someone whispered, "Go to the garden where the monk moves stones." And so he came. Ian greeted him with a nod, said nothing, just handed Kaoru a small round pebble, then gestured toward the garden. Kaoru stood there confused. "What do I do?" Ian did not reply, only moved another pebble, gently, deliberately, with breath as steady as snowfall. Kaoru copied him, at first awkwardly, then again and again. He stayed for days, then weeks. Each morning, a pebble. Each evening, tea in silence. No words about grief, no explanations. But in the hush, something shifted. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened. Not like a wound closing, more like salt dissolving in warm water. One evening, Kaoru asked the old monk, "Why do you move the stones if the snow always covers them again?" Ian looked at the garden, then said, "Because even if snow hides it, the garden remembers where I touched it." Kaoru frowned, "But it all disappears." Ian nodded. "So do we." That night, Kaoru dreamt of his wife. Not her drowning, not her dying, but her laughing, on a bridge, throwing pebbles into a stream. He woke with tears on his face, and for the first time in months, he smiled. Years passed. Ian grew slower. One winter he did not rise from his mat. Kaoru, who had remained at the monastery, now middle-aged, sat by his side. "Master," he whispered, "you always said nothing lasts." Ian nodded faintly. Then, with a smile so soft it seemed made of wind, he replied, "But love leaves shape, like water on stone." Then he closed his eyes and exhaled, one final long breath. When spring came, the snow melted early, revealing the garden. Not random, not chaotic, but precise. Each pebble formed subtle curves and paths that resembled nothing and yet felt like everything. A spiral here, a wave there, a quiet question shaped in stone. Kaoru spent days walking the paths, then began placing new stones, not to preserve the pattern, but to continue the gesture. Pilgrims came, not because they sought wisdom, but because they needed stillness. And they found it there, not in the monk, but in the garden that still moved, stone by stone, even when no one was watching. Philosophical reflection. In Buddhism, Vo-thern, impermanence, is not a curse but a gateway. It teaches us to act gently, to love deeply, and to live fully, knowing all things pass. Like the monk's garden, our lives are shaped not by what endures, but by how we touch the world before we go. Even if time erases the surface, the presence remains. Psychological insight. Grief is not something to get over. It is a form of love with nowhere to go. But when held in silence, not judged, not rushed, it can become tenderness. The story of Ian and Kaoru shows that healing does not always come from words, but from rituals of presence, small gestures, daily actions, care. This is how we honor what is gone, not by clinging, but by continuing. Closing whisper. If tonight you are grieving, let the silence hold you. Let the memory sit beside you, not as weight, but as shape. Like a smooth pebble in your palm, quiet, cool, real. And if you feel moved, place it gently, somewhere meaningful, not to mark an ending, but a beginning.
where the snow will fall and one day melt, and someone, perhaps even you, will remember how it felt to be touched by something that never asked to stay, but stayed anyway. If you've stayed with us through these 25 stories, then perhaps something in you has been touched. Not loudly, not like thunder, but like morning light across an old wooden floor. Soft, warm, unhurried. You've walked through gardens of silence, sat beside monks who said little, and heard echoes of your own life in ancient paths long forgotten by the world, but not by the heart. Maybe you've remembered something, a sadness you hadn't named, a forgiveness long overdue, a question still waiting. And if you haven't found an answer, that's okay. You weren't meant to. Not yet. Because healing is not a goal, it's a direction, a breath at a time, a night like this. So before you close your eyes tonight, may you feel that you are not alone, that somewhere in the silence, someone else is listening too, breathing too, changing too. And if these stories have offered you even a moment of stillness, of recognition, of peace, then this little boat has done its work. We invite you to subscribe to The Empty Boat if your heart tells you to. Not to follow, but to return. Whenever the world grows too loud and you long for the kind of quiet that doesn't push you to be more, but simply invites you to be exactly as you are, still, worthy, and wonderfully human. Good night, dear friend. May the Dharma guide your dreams, and may peace find you again and again.